Brownsville Road, penetrating the southern part of Pittsburgh. An old motorcycle roared through, emitting a rough exhaust sound resembling the cough of a terminal patient. Behind the handlebars was a man. The yellowed white coat, commonly known as a doctor's gown, fluttered in the brisk wind. Wearing the white coat like a jacket, he also had a black military vest and jeans inside. Combined with the leather gloves on his hands, it was quite a distinctive outfit. However, his face was hidden behind a black motorcycle helmet. Creak. The man, Aiden, parked his motorcycle on one side of a small street. His gaze turned towards the sky. It was noon, with the intense sunlight pouring down to the point of dazzling. Despite the pleasant weather, the atmosphere around the deserted storefronts where he stood was anything but cheerful. On the road, overturned car bodies were visible. Beyond them, a collapsed building groaned under the scattered broken glass. Inside what used to be a famous restaurant building, nothing could be seen except dust and darkness. But Aiden, after scanning the surroundings briefly, only retrieved a small package from behind his motorcycle and silently took a few steps forward. He headed a block further into the storefront area. There, amidst the desolation, stood a single brick house that maintained its original shape. The door was not torn, and the building was a modest one-story structure, adorned with a dark curtain of metal material covering the windows from the inside. The entrance featured a massive iron door reminiscent of a vault. Additionally, a formidable iron fence surrounded the house, giving it a menacing feel, distinct from the neglected buildings. Advancing towards the building, he stopped exactly 5 meters from the iron door. "Is anyone there?" Following, a deep, cavernous voice echoed, creeping out from the helmet. Soon, someone responded to his voice. "Yes, I've brought the goods." Aiden placed the small package he had brought on the ground. Then, stepping back 5 meters with another package in hand, he waited in silence. The building's interior echoed with the resonating sound of a heavy man's voice. "Got it. Just wait a moment." The rattling sound of metal quietly echoed. Meanwhile, there were also faint, whispered noises between the two people. Knowing this but still maintaining silence, Aiden continued to stand there. Only he knew where the gaze inside the black helmet was directed. Clunk. A hefty metallic sound of unlocking came from the iron door. The 15 centimeters thick iron door slowly twisted open, and a woman walked out from within. Rebecca Lewis, a red-haired Caucasian woman in her 40s with noticeable red hair. She approached Aiden, or rather, the small package on the ground, holding a gun in one hand. There was a subtle tension in her gaze. Behind Rebecca, another woman aimed a rifle towards the outside. The black muzzle nonchalantly observed Aiden. Rebecca, with an escort of that gun, slightly trembling, unpacked the goods on the ground with her shaky hands. Among them were a few cans, clean tissue, and a box of 5.56 millimeters bullets. "These are the requested items. Is everything in order?" "Yes." "Then leave my compensation and go back. Is this correct?" Rebecca picked up the items and placed them where the package had been. What lay there was a 200 milliliters blood pack. Aiden nodded without saying a word. Rebecca took the items and returned to the building, leaving Aiden to move. As he was about to turn around with the blood pack tucked inside his vest. "Wait a moment." Rebecca spoke up again. She was looking at him, her hand on the iron door. "Is there something else you need?" "It's not that." For a brief moment, a hesitating expression appeared in Rebecca's eyes. However, she shook it off with determination, surprising Aiden with an unexpected question. "Are you a doctor?" "What? Didn't you used to be a doctor?" "The thing hanging around your neck." Rebecca pointed at Aiden's name tag. It displayed the full name Aiden Lee, along with a faded photo, and his specialization as a surgeon at the Pittsburgh Medical Center. "Wait, Rebecca." The one from inside the iron door grabbed Rebecca's shoulder. A Latino woman in her 20s with brown skin, Diana, stood there, although Diana seemed to be trying to stop Rebecca with a bewildered face. Rebecca paid no attention and continued speaking. "If you're a doctor, there's something I want to discuss." "What is it?" "My daughter is sick." "Sick?" A hint of sarcasm crept into Aiden's voice. Due to the name tag he carried around, he had received unreasonable requests several times. However, Rebecca's response was sharper than he expected. "It's not what you're thinking. My daughter hasn't been bitten. So, you want medicine?" "Examination. To start with, we don't even know what medicine she needs." Aiden fell silent for a moment. While finding medicine was something he could do anytime, directly seeing the patient was an entirely different issue. But Rebecca seemed more desperate than he anticipated. Please. My 10-year-old has been vomiting blood for a week. At this rate, Aiden silently observed Rebecca as she pleaded, even without knowing who her daughter was. Seeing Diana behind Rebecca, who was also silently chewing her lip, it was evident that the child was in a serious condition. Fine. So Aiden nodded. In response, a glimmer of hope appeared on Rebecca's face, but Aiden cut it off immediately. But there's a condition. What do you want? It's not a demand. It's a matter of whether you can accept it or not. Aiden's hands moved upward. Whether there was a gun in those hands, or if Diana's rift pointed at him again. Aiden grabbed his helmet with empty hands. Coolly, he took it off, and the faces inside it made the two women involuntarily frown. So, the rumors were true. Rebecca was met with murky eyes that showed no glimmer of emotions. His distinct facial features weren't menacing, but the faded greenish skin and scars scattered across his face proved that. What Rebecca was looking at was an unmistakable zombie face. Aiden casually spoke. Do you still want my examination? Rebecca shivered at his still low, almost guttural voice. However, she didn't back down. Instead, she gritted her teeth and shouted towards the corpse. Yes, whether it's death from illness or turning into a zombie, that's what it is. Rebecca. Quiet, Diana. This is about my daughter and my problem. Ignoring her colleague, Rebecca, armed with a gun, walked towards Aiden again after throwing the gun away. Watching Rebecca approach, Aiden frowned uncomfortably. Rash judgments, no matter what. Did you go crazy and want to die? I've heard a lot of rumors about you. They say that if you make a deal, you never break the contract. Rumors are just rumors. Especially 90% of what those junk dealers gossip about is nonsense. And the remaining 10%? That's even more nonsense. Aiden pulled out his gun as Rebecca approached. Rebecca halted, and Diana, holding a rifle, urgently placed her finger on the trigger. In this tense situation, Aiden calmly spoke. Don't come any closer than this. What do you suggest? How will you examine my daughter? Even in the face of the gun, Rebecca's concern for her daughter was evident. Threats weren't effective. Knowing that a prolonged conversation with such an opponent wouldn't be beneficial, Aiden put his gun away, well aware that words were exhausted. Just wait here for a moment. He returned to his motorcycle. As Aiden approached the motorcycle, Rebecca followed him, protesting loudly. You, trying to escape. I'm not running away. What Aiden took from the motorcycle was a gray bag. Seeing the red cross drawn on it, Rebecca widened her eyes. It was dissimilar to the bags doctors carried when they went out on rounds. First, listen to the explanation. Your daughter is vomiting blood? Yes. Anything else? She had a severe cough. So, for the past 2 months, Rebecca detailed how long her daughter had been ill, and the symptoms she had suffered in front of Aiden. You wouldn't have just left it alone. Have you tried anything? We gave her a few types of cold medicine we barely found, but she didn't get better at all. I see. I want to see the patient myself. Rebecca heaved a heavy sigh but nodded in agreement. Okay, stay by the door. I'll bring the child. Soon, Rebecca brought a small girl in front of Aiden. A beautiful blonde girl with green eyes. Originally, she might have been quite cute, but now, due to the illness, she looked pitiful with a faded impression. The girl looked at the large figure in front of her, Aiden. Fear immediately filled her eyes, but that was all. Even if she knew the danger of walking corpses as she lived in this world, her weakened state indicated she couldn't react properly. In front of the girl, Aiden took out a stethoscope. He hung it around his ears and extended the stethoscope towards Rebecca, indicating her assistance in the examination. Tuberculosis. Aiden murmured as he listened to the rough breathing through the stethoscope, as if grinding on asphalt. Tuberculosis? It's a guess. Let me make it clear in advance, don't expect a 100% diagnosis from me. I know. Even though Rebecca admitted that she couldn't be certain, her face still showed her disappointment. In this world, where there were no hospitals or pharmacies left, what remained were just remnants, and verifying a clear disease had become a challenging task. Can it be cured? If it's tuberculosis, yes. Rebecca's face lit up at Aiden's words. But it's not an easy task. Antibiotics need to be taken continuously for at least 9 months. 9 months. If you need antibiotics, I'll bring them immediately. You'll be prepared to pay the price, right? Rebecca nodded, and Aiden put the stethoscope back into his bag, standing up. The examination was over. There was no other reason for him to stay here. Just as he stood up to leave, Rebecca's voice reached him. When will you come back? Aiden, who momentarily paused at her question, thought for a moment. There was undoubtedly a large hospital nearby, now turned into ruins. Even though zombies roamed there, it was still possible to get a few cans of antibiotics. I will come back tomorrow at noon. Okay, and thank you. Aiden looked back slightly at Rebecca's thank you, nodded once, and got on the motorcycle. Then he put on his helmet and, with the sound of an old engine, ran down the same quiet road as when he came here. Some time later, screech. The motorcycle that Aiden was riding came to a stop in front of a church. It was a church with a white cross adorned on the facade, constructed on a base of light brown bricks, seemingly luxurious. Although the wooden door leading into the church had been torn apart and was nowhere to be seen, the cross, hanging in the center, continued to silently watch over the empty city. Aiden's gaze, however, was focused on the road passing in front of the church, rather than the Grand Cross. It was a section where a 4-lane road narrowed down to 2 lanes. Several vehicles were entangled and overturned there. There was no way to drag the motorcycle through this mess. TSK. Aiden lightly clicked his tongue and unfolded a crumpled map. Fortunately, if this path led to the university hospital, his destination wasn't too far. So, he hid the motorcycle between the overturned cars and set foot on the ground. The blood pack he received earlier was carefully placed in the bag attached to the motorcycle. In his hand, he held a long shotgun, with a pistol, magazines, and a dagger strapped to his waist. This time, he pulled out another map, studying it in detail. Unlike the previous map, this one was chaotic, covered with various markings and scribbles. However, this map didn't depict terrain but rather dangers. Well, not exactly the damn gang territory, Aiden muttered as he looked at the map. But those crazy bastards don't even have control over themselves. So, concluding that he won't encounter them just because it's not their territory would be a big mistake. And there was more. The fanatics who claimed to be everywhere and nowhere, shouting about the end of the world, were another story altogether. In other words, a fight could break out at any moment. Aware of this, Aiden, armed and ready, set out on the motorcycle once more. Lud. He easily crossed over the overturned vehicles that now only left ashes. There, within the upside-down driver's seat, a charred corpse was visible. However, the corpse didn't move, so Aiden paid it no attention. He continued to traverse several cars blocking the way. Only then did the open road reveal itself once again. Another obstacle, which looked like a large weed growing on the road, was wandering along the stretch of road. Zombies. When Aiden appeared, they all turned their creaky heads and glared at him. Aiden, without paying them attention, tried to walk down the road, receiving that stinging, rotten glare. But right after that he frowned. Clearly, with his helmet off, Aiden's appearance was no different from an ordinary zombie. However, his gait was quite different from other zombies that ran around like mad dogs. His movements were clearly closer to those of a human than a zombie, as he held the gun tightly. Maybe because of that, Kaya, without any warning, the zombie standing closest to him, like a stone statue, moved, as if stung. The creature thrust its teeth into Aiden's arm. In response, a green, disgusting liquid burst from Aiden's arm, entering the zombie's mouth. Quack, cack. The zombie gnashed its teeth as if it had consumed something inedible. Aiden roughly pushed him away. This stupid bastard. Seeing his torn clothes on the zombie's teeth, Aiden cursed. But he couldn't easily shoot or swing a knife. No matter how stupid the corpses were, they had at least some sense of hostility. This meant that if you attacked the same zombie right in front of other zombies, you could be attacked by them. When the zombie stepped back, Aiden spat out his frustration and continued walking. A 13-story building made of brown brick, the university hospital, his destination, was visible. There were still numerous corpses wandering around the area. Seeing the scene, it seemed that the incident hadn't happened recently. Fine. To shake off the unpleasant incident that had just occurred, he intentionally spoke with a loud voice. Even though the zombies around him looked at him, sensing the foul-smelling green liquid and a pungent odor, they turned their heads away. Aiden squeezed through the zombies and entered the brown building. Beyond the large entrance was a large space that was probably used as the hospital's lobby, a space with reception desks lined up in a straight line and long chairs for people waiting. There, Aiden tried to find a map of the building. The first place he had to stop by was the hospital's pharmacy. Originally a place that made medicine for patients, it was the easiest place to find antibiotics. If there would be nothing, he'll have to search the medicine warehouse somewhere in the hospital. Of course, a hospital warehouse of this size may have more than enough medicines, but generally, getting into such a warehouse is much more difficult than getting into a pharmacy. Fighting with a large iron door or a door that opens with an electronic key was an effort that Aiden wanted to avoid, as he hadn't come because he needed a lot of medicine right away. 313. Okay, to the right? After checking the structure of the building on the map, he headed up the stairs. Even though the sun was shining brightly outside, the building was dark like a cave. Only the sunlight streaming through the broken windows served as the sole source of illumination. Grr. As he walked through the building filled with wandering corpses, Aiden tensed up. A shotgun muzzle, protruding from Aiden's shoulder, was aimed forward, and the attached light brightened the path. Although he only saw ordinary zombies at first glance, within this darkened building, there could be special zombies lurking about. Creatures like stalkers, black bodies blending into the darkness, or Bigfoots, several times the size of regular zombies. They were commonly known as mutants, and they existed within the shadows of the darkened buildings. Aiden didn't know how those unusual and dangerous zombies were created, but there was one thing he knew. They could differentiate between him and regular zombies, recognizing him as an enemy. Aiden slowly climbed the stairs. The second floor looked similar to the first floor. At first glance, there seemed to be nothing special, but as Aiden continued up the stairs, he furrowed his brow slightly. It's been a while. There was a barricade, beds, sofas, and whatever items could be found in the surroundings were piled up as a makeshift obstacle, showing signs of someone trying to block something. However, there were no signs of life inside. The reason was evident. To the left corner of the barricade, one bed that had been blocking the way was completely crushed and in poor condition, which was why Aiden entered through the broken entrance into the barricade. As he did, a sight completely different from the floor below unfolded before his eyes. Walls and ceilings stained with dark, discolored blood, and a floor scattered with rusty casings and human corpses. Beyond the barricade, the aftermath of a battle that had taken place was vividly apparent. Aiden picked up a spent cartridge that had fallen to the floor in that place. He blew the dust off the cartridge, wondering when it had fallen here. Then he examined the cartridge carefully, moving it up and down. 9 by 19 millimeters ammunition, one of the widely used pistol calibers, and it was a type that he couldn't find easily nowadays, especially for the pistol he had. It's worth taking. He tossed the cartridge aside and checked the long corridor on the third floor. The muzzle and the bright light attached to him quickly scanned the left and right sides of the corridor. No signs of mutants were visible. Having confirmed the safety, he proceeded to inspect the stairs and the corridor floor. Then, as expected, he noticed several dropped pistols. Although there were hardly any intact guns, he checked the magazines from those guns. He pocketed the undamaged bullets. Among the guns, some were still in the hands of zombies, but Aiden didn't hesitate and took the guns from their hands. Keek! A zombie wearing a police uniform made a grumbling sound as if annoyed, but that was it. After a brief glance at Aiden, it turned its head as if nothing had happened. That way, Aiden quickly secured about 40 rounds of ammunition. His pocket had become quite hefty in no time. Feeling like he had earned some extra income, he then headed back to the original destination, the pharmacy. The pharmacy was located in the right corner on the third floor, and fortunately, the door wasn't locked. When he shone the light, a zombie in the pharmacy, wearing a white gown like Aiden, nodded its head as if greeting. A name tag was hanging around its neck. Was it a doctor who worked here? Aiden looked at the name tag and smiled sarcastically. You've worked hard, Dr. Kane. Aiden passed by him, approached a shelf that occupied an entire wall, and checked it. But whether someone had already raided it or not, there were hardly any medicines left on the shelf. So he turned his gaze to the drawer next to the shelf. It was smaller than the shelf, but enough to store a considerable amount of medicine. Creak. It had been so long since it was last opened that the stiff, rigid drawer made a creepy sound as it opened. As Aiden expected, there were some medicines left inside, but none of them were the antibiotics he was looking for. Aiden picked up usable medicines from among them and searched other drawers. Here it is. When he searched the fifth drawer, he finally found the antibiotics he was looking for. Just to be sure, he checked the description and name written on the antibiotic bottle. No mistake. He immediately took several bottles, as many as were available. Although not accurate, it was enough to last at least a year if a child were to take them. Good. Having accomplished his goal, he searched all the remaining drawers, picked only the medicines in high demand, and stood up from his place. It was time to leave now. Exiting the pharmacy, he quickly headed for the stairs. Then, just as Aiden awkwardly emerged from the barricade, unexpected noise suddenly came from below. Was it from outside the hospital? He immediately stopped moving and focused on the sound. Zombies were rampaging, which meant someone had appeared. Aiden furrowed his brows. Did the gangsters manage to crawl all the way here? Even the zombies inside the barricade were reacting to that noise. Zombies trying to squeeze through the narrow gap in the barricade. If he left them like this, not only the third floor, but also zombies would pour down from the upper floors. So he forcefully pushed away the zombies and stood the fallen bed upright to block the hole in the barricade. The zombies inside made thumping noises, but the barricade that had been neglected surprisingly held up well. At this rate, even if zombies were deployed, it would withstand for a short time. Having regained his composure by concentrating on the strange noise below, Aiden soon realized something was amiss. The screaming sound of zombies was roaring so loudly, and there was no gunshot sound from anywhere. Could it be an execution? It was a brutal act mainly carried out by some gangs or fanatics, usually performed on believers or their families, deliberately throwing human beings, who were still alive, as bait to zombies. However, even considering that, there were many strange points. Most importantly, the surroundings didn't fit the execution. There were zombies scattered around, and there was no reason for them to come all the way to this place, just to watch the miserable death of a traitor. Moreover, the zombie screams didn't stop quickly. The number of zombies laid around this area reached dozens. This meant that 1 or 2 people wouldn't last more than 10 seconds without being torn apart. Already, the zombie outbreak had lasted for more than a minute. In other words, someone who caused this commotion was still alive, and they were still fighting fiercely against the zombies. So many possibilities passed through Aiden's mind, but none of them seemed like a proper answer. Therefore, he decided to confirm the truth with his own eyes and moved his foot, which had been paused for a moment. Descending to the second floor, the unpleasant sounds of zombie screams became even closer. Although it seemed like there was a battle taking place in front of the hospital, now it appeared he had entered the hospital lobby. Because of that, the second floor corridor of the hospital was rather deserted. It was because all the second floor zombies had gathered on the first floor. Aiden fixed his shotgun and looked down, targeting the area below the stairs. Whatever was down there, the probability of it being his enemy was high, so he prepared himself for a battle and immediately turned the corner of the stairs, looking down to the first floor. What? Then, he began to doubt his own eyes, as he never expected the scene that unfolded before him. The barrel of the shotgun aimed at the front wavered. The space beyond the hospital reception desk. There, a brown-haired girl was fiercely fighting against numerous zombies. Aiden frowned as he watched the bizarre battle unfolding in front of him. Even though he was witnessing it with his own eyes, the sight was hard to believe. The Asian girl with brown hair seemed to be in her late teens at most, and the clothing she wore was an oddly extravagant black dress. How did she end up here in such a state? That alone made her seem out of her mind. However, the reason the girl was special wasn't just because of her appearance. A zombie's head was torn off, soaring through the air. It wasn't due to a sharp blade or a gunshot. It was simply because the girl's hand had swirled once, tearing the zombie's body apart like tissue paper. She was tearing through the approaching zombies, confronting them across the reception desk. In the midst of this astonishing scene, Aiden hesitated on how to react. Should he help? But who was he helping? Helping the zombies meant assisting the very creatures she was annihilating. Yet, the girl, who was tearing apart the zombie about to attack her, also didn't seem like someone in need of help. No, from the beginning, it wasn't clear whether he should consider her an enemy or an ally. As Aiden grappled with these questions, "Get lost, you damn bastards!" The girl's irritated voice resounded. Suddenly, her onslaught was pushing the zombies back. Finally, the zombies broke through the girl's barrier, the reception desk, toppling over it. At this, a look of disappointment crossed the girl's face. Bang! His shotgun, which had been silent, finally burst. Then, several zombies that were charging at the girl were swept away by the bullets and turned into pieces of rotten meat. A loud appearance accompanied by a roar that seemed to shake the earth. In the midst of the loud entrance, several zombie heads turned towards Aiden. It was as he intended. Despite the potential to attract more zombies, Aiden fired his gun, diverting the attention of the zombies towards him and away from the girl. But the zombies didn't move according to his intentions. Their gaze quickly returned to the girl, showing no interest in Aiden. Aiden focused on the girl as the zombies once again converged on her. The noisy entrance turned into an awkward, ignored spectacle. However, Aiden seized the opportunity. Gunshots erupted consecutively. In the merciless storm of 12-gauge buckshot, the bodies of the zombies, now vulnerable with their backs exposed, scattered like autumn leaves. After the shotgun's ammo was depleted, Aiden skillfully pulled out his pistol, piercing the heads of the zombies. At first glance, his ability to fire bullets calmly and accurately was extraordinary. Had there been others witnessing the scene, they would have been astonished at Aiden's combat abilities, as much as the girl tearing zombies apart with her bare hands. Yet, there were no other spectators here. Thanks to that, Aiden and the girl on the opposite side of the lobby continued their activities in mutual indifference, piercing and tearing through the living dead. After barely 30 seconds, the number of zombies that had numbered in the tens had now reduced to half. Bang! Aiden's pistol shot pierced through another zombie that had been approaching the girl. The zombie's head was torn apart, repulsively fluid oozed from its forehead, and his awkwardly standing body fell to the floor. Aiden, recognizing its death, turned his gun to the next target. But at that moment, wow, quack, another zombie's head was just being torn off from its neck with a clean cutting sound. But the zombie didn't die. The grotesque sight of the severed head, still moving independently on the ground. Still, the sight of the head rolling across the floor to Aiden's feet resembled a scene from a cheap horror movie. Aiden stomped on the head with his combat boots, and the zombie's head crumbled like rotten fruit. That was the last one. In Aiden's field of vision, there was no other threat except the girl. The lobby of the hospital regained its silence, and Aiden turned his gaze towards the girl. Ha! The girl, who had been battling the zombies, breathed heavily. Aiden aimed his gun at the girl and cautiously approached. Then suddenly, he noticed something and stopped in his tracks. You, what? The girl's voice, spat out towards Aiden, sounded faint, but Aiden couldn't grasp the meaning behind that faint voice. He just looked at the wounds on the girl's right wrist, left shoulder, and around her waist. Sharp teeth marks, and the flowing red blood. Anyone could tell those were bite wounds from zombies. Aiden's gaze was filled with a momentary despair. The reason he had wasted so many bullets sweeping through the zombies became clear now, but he quickly discarded those emotions and raised the gun towards the girl. There were still a few bullets left that he needed to waste for her. What are you doing? At that moment, the girl, who had been on guard against Aiden, collapsed right there. Perhaps she had exhausted her strength. Despite the seemingly strange battle power she had shown, the girl must have reached her limit in front of the increasing number of zombies. Nevertheless, Aiden didn't easily approach the fallen girl. More than anything, he was concerned about the strength she had, so he patiently aimed his gun and waited. The girl, for a while, closed her eyes, breathing heavily. Gradually, her breathing calmed down, and she fell into a deep sleep. Aiden cautiously approached the collapsed girl. He crossed over the reception desk, the legs of the table, which had barely endured the chaos in the middle of the battlefield, creaked but didn't break. He went all the way to where the girl was leaning against the wall, and he slowly raised the gun towards the girl's head. Even so, the girl's movement didn't return. Aiden sighed shortly. A person bitten by a zombie turns into the same kind of zombie within a few minutes, at the latest within half a day. Therefore, making her comfortable here was the last courtesy for the girl. With that thought, Aiden was about to pull the trigger the moment he decided to. A question escaped his lips. Aiden was looking at the girl's left shoulder, which was now exposed as her dress had been torn apart by zombies. However, the skin visible inside the torn dress was surprisingly clean and white, with only a few dried bloodstains remaining. Aiden's brow furrowed. Was it a hallucination? No, that couldn't be. He had just seen it a few minutes ago. Aiden remembered the places where the girl had been bitten, the left shoulder, right wrist, and the side near her waist. But now, there was no sign of any wounds in those areas. How? With this strange event, Aiden's gun slowly lowered. Could this be another power the girl possessed? Aiden felt a perplexity in his mind. He couldn't comprehend this unexpected and never-before-seen phenomenon, where wounds from a zombie bite were seemingly healing on their own. After thinking for a moment, he quickly put the pistol away from the girl. Killing the girl like this might be a big mistake. That was his thought. But then, what should he do with this girl now? The safest for him is to leave her as is. With that, Aiden no longer has to get involved with the girl, and the purpose of coming here today can also be neatly achieved. But Aiden couldn't easily take his steps from the girl. He scanned the girl's cleansed skin again. Both that regenerative power and the unidentified power shown earlier were beyond Aiden's common sense. Although they posed a clear threat, they also held some potential. In less than 10 seconds, countless calculations went through Aiden's mind. What would be the most advantageous course of action for himself and the girl? And the result? Despite the risks, Aiden decided to take the girl with him. Even though they would have to face zombies on the way, he couldn't let go of this unexpected possibility he had encountered after 3 years. Aiden made that decision and looked at his weapons. Fortunately, there were still enough bullets left. Aiden took out the empty pistol and shotgun magazines and reloaded them. Then, carrying the fallen girl over one shoulder, he left the hospital. Several hours later, Aiden entered his hideout when dusk began to fall. It was a rundown apartment on the outskirts of Pittsburgh. In a corner of the apartment on the 5th floor, a dim light shone. Inside the sparsely furnished room were a wooden desk, a chair, and a rusty metal bed with only a mattress on it. Aiden sat down on the bed. In front of him, the girl he had seen during the day was now chained to a chair. The girl hadn't regained consciousness yet, but that was not necessarily a bad sign. Typically, those infected by the zombie virus showed signs of heightened awareness as symptoms progressed. They stayed awake, strangely full of energy, and could even ignore severe injuries. So, the fact that the girl had peacefully slept for several hours implied that she was not undergoing zombification. Strange, Aiden murmured as he stared at the girl. Her identity remained a mystery to him. A girl with a flamboyant dress on her blood-stained body, appearing in front of the hospital teeming with zombies. Even if she was just a survivor or part of some gang of fanatics, there were too many strange aspects about her. If he had a bit more time today, Aiden would have tried to wake her forcibly to inquire about her identity. Looking out the window, Aiden sighed shortly, lifting his head. The sun had already set. The time after sunset was dangerous for everyone surviving in this world. Some zombie mutants actively roamed around at night, making it a precarious time for humans. This is because they react sensitively to light and have a fighting power that is on a level different from that of ordinary zombies. Even if Aiden is in perfect condition, they can be a burden to deal with. So, unless he wanted to tear down this dilapidated apartment, today's activities had to end here. So he blew out the small candle on the table that was burning. Naturally, the room he was in was buried in the silence and darkness of the city. Just like that, another night passed. The next day, sparse sunlight came through the window covered with curtains. Seeing this, Aiden took something out of his luggage. It was a desk clock the size of the palm of one's hand. It was still faithfully moving every second, indicating that it was now 7 a.m. Even after the sun rises, there are times when dangerous people walk outside in the early morning. Considering this danger, it was essential to finish all activities by 7 a.m., the time when the environment became safe again. Aiden, having confirmed the time, pulled back the curtains. The bright morning sunlight streamed into the room like waves of light. Nevertheless, the girl tied to the chair showed no intention of waking up, because it could be troublesome if she woke up in the middle of the night. Aiden had even put a gag on her, making the effort somewhat pointless. Aiden removed the gag from the girl and put his helmet on. Then, he placed his hand on the girl's shoulder. He had thought about shaking her awake, but soon he changed his mind. There were things to do while she remained unconscious. Aiden took a syringe from his bag, a clean item uncontaminated by the outside, and opened one of the unused blood collection sets. He then pierced the girl's arm with the syringe. When he pulled the plunger, the girl's blood was drawn into the syringe. But, the color of the blood was odd. Not the usual red of human blood, nor the greenish color of zombie bodily fluids. It was an orange color. Perplexed by this unexpected result, Aiden's forehead wrinkled. "Who are you?" There was no time for him to be surprised. The girl, who had been sleeping all night, was now looking at him with fierce eyes. "Awake, huh?" Aiden took a step back, looking at the girl's red eyes. Her gaze was filled with hostility, but Aiden understood it. He was curious about the girl's presence, but she had more reason to be bewildered, waking up to a stranger. So, Aiden decided that it was better to explain the situation to the girl first. to ease her heightened guard and allow her the chance to express whatever she wanted to say. Remaining cautious, Aiden calmly spoke. I'm Aiden, a junk dealer. A junk dealer roams the dangerous streets, scavenging for useful items, engaging in trades with survivors, or resolving requests a term encompassing those who make a living in such ways. With this concise introduction, Aiden revealed his name and occupation. However, the girl responded with a sarcastic smirk, as if she didn't believe him. Junk dealer? Is that a nickname? Don't you know what a junk dealer is? I don't get the meaning of that term. Was she considering herself a gang member or a fanatic? Despite sensing a subtle mismatch in the conversation, Aiden continued speaking. If we continue with the answers, we're in Pittsburgh. Aiden casually mentioned the name of this place, but perhaps the name of the now ruined city held more surprise than he expected. The girl's eyes widened in shock. Pittsburgh? Did I enter the church's territory? Church? A word he couldn't comprehend. However, Aiden refrained from questioning her about it. The girl was struggling as if having a seizure, using all her strength to break free from the chains. Untie this right now. A sudden change in her attitude left Aiden bewildered. Well, the chains wouldn't be undone with her wild movements. The real issue was the chair she was tied to. In the midst of her intense struggle, akin to a caught fish on a fishing line, ominous creaking sounds echoed from the chair. Quickly approaching, Aiden grabbed the girl's shoulders to forcibly stop her movements and spoke. Calm down. I have no intention of harming you. Don't make me laugh. Am I supposed to believe the words of a church dog? I think you misunderstand something. This isn't the territory of fanatics. It doesn't belong to anyone. Although Aiden knew that fanatics were entirely different from the church, there were no other religious groups with territories in this world. So, he somewhat adjusted his words to fit the situation. But was that the right answer? Fanatics, the girl muttered with genuine confusion. After exhaling a deep sigh, she continued her questioning. Then tell me where this is. Let me show you. Afraid that mentioning the name Pittsburgh again might lead to a similar reaction, Aiden dragged the chair by the window. The 5-story apartment Aiden used as his hideout was built on a shallow hill, offering a clear view of the surroundings not as high as downtown skyscrapers, but enough to observe key locations such as the important road leading to the apartment and the path connecting to the shopping district. A perfect position to identify the presence of gangs or mutated entities. Aiden had chosen this hideout for that reason. The girl's eyes were now capturing the Pittsburgh scenery through the window. What is this? However, the girl seemed more confused as she stared at the view. During this brief moment of silence, Aiden intervened. What's your name? Do you belong to any group? What? You don't know me. You brought me here without knowing who I am. I brought you here because I don't know. The girl expressed disbelief, emitting a dry laugh. But soon, she sighed and finally revealed her name. I'm Arian Clifford. Up to that point, Aiden had merely found her name unusual. However, what followed made him furrow his brow. One of the original 5, a vampire. After that, a heated debate ensued. For Aiden, it was an experience he didn't want to go through again. Arian's words were more nonsensical than the nonsense spouted by drunken gang members. So, let me get this straight. You're a vampire who fought against a church group in a world where all sorts of monsters and exorcists operate in modern-day America. But you're not from this world? Summarizing Arian's words, she seemed to be from an alternate universe where strange phenomena existed in modern America. Of course, there were other statements about the meaning of the original 5, battles against the church's holy knights, and blood magic, but Aiden had forgotten them all. From Aiden's perspective, it was all nonsensical talk. But Arian felt the same way. Why that expression? Do you think what you're saying makes sense? Why would it be suspicious? Zombie virus, they say. The world went to hell because of that. Are you making a movie or something? That's what Aiden wanted to say. However, he held back the smirk and calmly spoke. Even seeing my face, you're saying things like that. Now, Aiden had removed the helmet he was wearing. His face had clean features, yet anyone could mistake him for a zombie at first glance. Moreover, to the still open window, zombies roaming the streets were easily visible. Most importantly, Arian had fought against those zombies herself. So, Arian, unable to respond to Aiden's words, just stared out the window. In reality, her suspicions were gradually fading. She, too, found Aiden's words as unbelievable as he found hers. In this clear abnormality, she had a hunch. Could it be that boundary the woman mentioned was this? What? Actually, I was in the middle of an escape. But this time, I was cornered more than usual. I had to borrow the power of someone who could surpass the usual boundaries, but I didn't know that the boundary extended beyond the world. Aiden sighed at the nonsense once again, yet Arian remained serious. It seemed like her conjecture was correct. She was silently realizing that this place was different from the world she came from. Above all, the scenery of that street was decisive. It wasn't just a few zombies walking on the road causing this. Such a level of manipulation could be done by the church's tricks. But the appearance of the desolate street was different. According to him, Pittsburgh in this world had experienced a zombie outbreak over 3 years ago. A discarded, abandoned city. What Arian saw through her eyes matched that description. Was it possible to artificially create the appearance of a city so thoroughly ruined? As Arian momentarily fell silent, Aiden, too, was lost in thought. Between doubt and belief, he, too, was wavering. A vampire. The word itself didn't even elicit a sarcastic laugh. However, Aiden had seen something. First, the power Arian showed when fighting zombies. That power was undoubtedly mysterious. Another piece of evidence was Arian's blood. The syringe with orange-colored blood was still on the table. It meant that Arian wasn't either human or zombie. Was she an alien? If she were, how would that differ from being a vampire? You said you're a vampire? Then, do you have any proof that you're a vampire? So Aiden asked. The possibility of the truth in Arian's words lingered, and he couldn't completely dismiss it. In response, Arian thought for a moment and then smiled. Give me blood. Blood. If you give me blood, I'll show you the evidence. Aiden narrowed his eyes at Arian's words. You're not planning to show drinking blood as evidence, are you? Just bring it first. I'll take care of the rest. Arian said confidently. Was there a corner in him that believed her? Or was she just trying to deceive him? After a moment of hesitation, Aiden stood up. Okay. He took out the blood pack he received yesterday from his bag, a few steps away from the girl. Here's the blood. Once you show me. The words, how it worked, didn't follow. As if pulled by a fishing line, the blood pack slipped out of his hand. It soared like it had wings, heading straight to Arian's mouth. What was surprising wasn't just that. With both hands tightly bound, Arian tore into the blood pack with her teeth. Aiden thought the blood would pour down afterward. But, in the end, not a drop of blood fell to the floor. The blood that came out of the pack flowed through the air, creating a beautiful crimson sphere. How is it? Arian asked with a smug expression while biting into the apple-like sphere. Though it looked like a scene from magic, it certainly wasn't a trick. It was an undeniable reality unfolding before him. Even Aiden, with his doubting expression, couldn't help but flick his tongue in response. This is insane. Even he, with his many doubts, couldn't deny it anymore. Regardless of whether she was a vampire or not, this girl named Arian was undoubtedly a presence beyond Aiden's understanding. Then, Aiden's intuition issued a warning. He took out a watch from his bag to check the time. It was exactly the time to leave. So, he grabbed his helmet and packed up. Arian, who had already consumed all the blood, reacted. Wait a minute. Are you leaving? Yes. What about me? You'll have to wait for a while. I'll be back today. After saying that, Aiden cautiously gauged Arian's reaction. Arian expressed her dissatisfaction with a disgruntled voice. Today? You expect me to be tied up here for hours? Are you insane? I'm sorry, but I can't release you right away. I don't have the confidence that you're safe. Aiden pointed out the harsh reality, causing Arian to hesitate for a moment. It wasn't a wrong statement. She was different from humans, and she had experienced this kind of suspicion from others several times. Vampires had always been objects of fear for everyone, although it was a bit unclear whether she included zombies in that category. Arian spoke with a slightly softened voice. Then at least give me some food and water. Can't you survive by just drinking blood? How can you live by eating only that? Are you full if you just drink water? Indeed, is caloric intake separate? In realization of this fact, Aiden immediately brought food from another room, since zombies also need something to eat. Aiden had previously stocked some groceries in a few of his hiding places. What he brought was a bottle of water, a salmon, and a can of corn each. Is this all? Arian exclaimed with a bewildered expression upon seeing the food on the table. However, Aiden had something to say in this situation. As I mentioned earlier, this world is different from the one you used to live in. Even these are hard to find. Huh? Really? I understand. All right. Thinking of the scenery outside, Arian reluctantly agreed and stared at Aiden. Aiden wondered what this naive girl wanted now, but Arian's subsequent request while uncomfortable, was quite reasonable. "What are you doing? Feed me or set me free." "Ha!" A deep sigh, the deepest among the sighs he let out today, escaped Aiden's lips. Among the morning meals Aiden had endured for nearly a year, the most dreadful time, he headed straight to Rebecca's dwelling to deliver the antibiotics as contracted for a sick child. Rebecca rushed barefoot to meet Aiden, just as she literally said she would. There was no trace of the wariness from yesterday. You couldn't find the same caution from her as before anywhere. "Thank you. Really, thank you so much." After receiving instructions on the appropriate dosage and frequency of antibiotics, Rebecca spoke those words and then went back inside her house. It was likely that she had turned her attention to her daughter, who was still suffering. Left with Aiden and quietly staring at him was Diana. Even now, she held a rifle in one hand flawlessly. She kept a distance of a few meters from Aiden. Unlike Rebecca, her gaze contained full vigilance as she stared at Aiden. But Aiden still had something to say to her. "Let's talk for a moment." "Are you talking to me?" With a noticeably stiffer demeanor than Rebecca, Diana questioned him, as if she hadn't expected him to talk to her. Without a word, Aiden nodded. Diana momentarily froze her expression but soon nodded. "What is it?" "Tuberculosis is contagious." Aiden brought up the main topic right away. If Rebecca's daughter was indeed a real tuberculosis patient, it meant that others living in the same space were likely infected with the tuberculosis bacteria. So, Diana briefly tightened her expression but soon nodded. "Really? But what can we do now? It's already too late. And is this the time for us to be afraid of tuberculosis?" Diana spoke with a bitter smile. Although pessimistic, it was also a reasonable statement. In this place, even if someone were a healthy person with no diseases at all, it was impossible to guarantee that they would live longer than someone vomiting blood from tuberculosis. Therefore, Aiden nodded without saying a word. Diana suddenly noticed something from the doorway and then placed something near Aiden. "Ah, this. Rebecca forgot to give it to you. It's payment for the medicine." It was a blood collection set. 5 sets, with none of the packages torn open yet. What Aiden handed over to them today was a can of antibiotics, enough for 2 months. But since he couldn't get the entire year's worth in one go, they had settled for trading only this much for now. And for the cost of 1 antibiotic, this was an appropriate exchange. "You had this. I've been searching around nearby pharmacies recently, and I happened to come across it." The reason was evident even without saying. They must have been looking for medicine for Rebecca's daughter one way or another. Anyway, the deal was now concluded. But Aiden didn't leave immediately. He still had something to ask. It was about the girl he had found yesterday. "Let me ask you one thing." Upon Aiden's words, Diana continued to raise her eyebrows as if urging him to continue. "Have you ever heard of a vampire?" "Vampire?" Diana's expression twitched slightly at the unexpected question. In response, Aiden spoke. "Doesn't matter. Even rumors from the junk dealers are fine. Yesterday, you said it was all nonsense, didn't you?" "I haven't heard anything. Why, did even blood-sucking zombies start appearing now?" "I wish that were the case. Seems like there's no gain in the end." Aiden, somewhat anticipating this, felt no regret. Perhaps next time, should he go in officially by the information? With that thought in mind, just as Aiden was about to turn away, Diana spoke. "Hey, can I ask you something too?" Seeing Diana's mood, it didn't seem like a very important question. If she wanted to ask, "Is it just small talk?" Aiden doesn't particularly enjoy this kind of small talk. However, having initiated an unrelated question himself, refusing now seemed shameless, so he reluctantly nodded. "Why are you asking things like blood collection kits and the blood as the price? You are the only junk dealer who accepts it as a trade item." Diana was asking with quite an intriguing expression. But for Aiden, it was a question he had already heard several times. So, he answered familiarly. "It's needed to make medicine." "Medicine?" Diana's head tilted. Then, as if something occurred to her, she widened her eyes. "No way. Are you researching some kind of vaccine with that?" "A vaccine, huh?" The vaccine she was talking about was undoubtedly a vaccine for the zombie virus. Aiden could have burst into laughter at the guess that was almost ridiculous. Not only could you not make a vaccine by just collecting human blood, but more importantly, a vaccine was unnecessary for Aiden, who had already turned into a zombie. "Do you think I need something like that?" "Then, the answer is already finished. I'll hand over the remaining antibiotics in about a week." Judging that he had paid enough for the question, Aiden immediately moved away. Although Diana looked at him with a regretful gaze, Aiden didn't react to it. Aiden rode his motorcycle and moved south along the road, the area of West Mifflin, bordering south of Pittsburgh. It was known for its large commercial zone with scattered stores and warehouses on the shallow plain. It was relatively sparsely populated by zombies and had plenty of abandoned goods, making it once known as Pittsburgh's treasure trove. However, numerous scavengers and gangs had picked it clean multiple times, leaving only empty warehouse buildings. Aiden's destination was one of these large warehouses, because in recent times, a major trader had set up a base in one of the empty warehouses and continued commercial activities based on that. The motorcycle came to a sudden stop as Aiden faced an unexpected obstacle in the middle of the road. A large barrier made of rusty metal plates and wooden pillars, about 3 stories high. Numerous gun barrels protruded from it, aiming at the top. A voice came from behind the barrier. Name: Aiden Lee. His low voice resounded, quiet yet clear. A head suddenly appeared over the barrier, showing a middle-aged man with a large scar extending from his forehead to his left cheek. The man, somewhat lean and sharp-looking, revealed yellowed teeth and a smile. The junk dealer here. Let him in. In response to his shouting, a screeching sound was heard from beneath the wall. The barrier, comprised of rusted metal plates and wooden pillars, opened up, revealing a large gap wide enough for Aiden's motorcycle to pass through. Aiden slowly rode in, and inside, he could see the man who recognized him. So, alive and well? I didn't see you for a month. Thought you might have kicked the bucket. Anders, you're still up to this stupid stuff. Looking around the large warehouse, Aiden remarked. The first thing that caught his eye was people, not a huge number, but something not commonly seen in the ghost town. However, upon closer inspection, something more surprising stood out. Tents were pitched, and makeshift stalls were set up around the warehouse, with people engaging in trade. Ha. If someone else had said something like that, I would have put a bullet in his head. But if it's you, I have nothing to say. Anyway, let's go. Don't take off your helmet. I don't want unnecessary trouble. Sure. More importantly, did you come for another deal? Leave your motorcycle and gun here. Follow me. Aiden nodded, and Anders led him inside the warehouse. Inside, there was a considerable amount of goods piled up. Everything belonged to Anders' gang. How is it? Quite well, huh? Anders asked with a confident face. The name of the gang that Anders belonged to was Snake. The reason it is in past tense is because the name has now changed. Hard to believe. Originally, Anders' gang, like other gangs, survived day by day through robbery and fighting. However, persuaded by the gang's leader Anders, they devised a new survival strategy based on the resources they had accumulated. It was this merchant cooperative. The intention was to use this warehouse as a base to purchase and sell resources and information, thereby profiting from continuous transactions with junk dealers and survivor groups, as well as other gangs. To put it simply, although they are a gang with military power, they don't use that military force for plunder, but rather make money through business. Aiden had thought from the beginning, and still thought now, that this was nothing more than cowardly talk. Yet, for some reason, this merchant cooperative seemed to be unexpectedly successful. So, what do you want this time? Guiding Aiden to a corner of the warehouse, Anders asked. Bullets and food. Sure, no problem. I can just give you the ones you always use, right? How about instant noodles or spaghetti for food? That's enough. Just canned food. All right. Anything else? I want to buy information. Then Anders' lips curved slightly. Information, huh? What about? I want information on zombie mutants I don't know about. For starters, tell me about the ones you know. Aiden listed the names of the mutants he had encountered. After hearing them, Anders nodded. There are only 2 mutants not in your list. One has relatively accurate information as it was recently hunted down in Cleveland. The other one is a bit uncertain as it's based on eyewitness accounts. But there's at least some credibility since multiple people have testified. How about it? Interested? I'll take both. That's a lot. Then, let me hear your offer first. Aiden took out 2 small pill bottles from his belongings. What's this? This is an anesthetic, and the one next to it is a painkiller. They were one of the medications brought from the hospital where he met Arian yesterday. Upon this, Anders searched through the medicine, then turned his head and called one of his colleagues. Hey, Jackson, go and call Brown. The man called Jackson disappeared from sight, and soon returned with a woman. You called? The 30-year-old African-American woman named Brown was the only doctor in the merchant cooperative. Anders belonged to. With a somewhat anxious expression, Brown asked, "I'm busy. Is it urgent? It'll only take a moment. Come here and take a look at this. Is this usable?" Was he just calling her to inspect the items? With that thought, she furrowed her brows slightly. But she couldn't refuse Anders' instructions as a member of the gang. Brown picked up the heavy bottle and carefully examined the label. Soon, her eyes widened. An anesthetic? Brown looked at Anders with surprise. It was because just yesterday, she had to perform surgery to remove a bullet without anesthesia because there was no such drug available. The patient who underwent surgery was a middle-aged man, and several people were needed just to restrain him. The one next to it was a painkiller. Both were medications she desperately lacked. Brown soon looked at Aiden and Anders and quickly understood the situation. So, without saying anything, she nodded slightly at Anders. "Well, take it and check if it's genuine. If it is, use it as is." "Okay," Anders asked Aiden. Since the goods would be handed over once the deal was made, Aiden nodded. Upon this, Brown breathed a sigh of relief. "Fortunately, I already have surgery again." "Why, someone got injured." "Davis. There was a shootout with the snuff gang outside. Again. Those damn bastards." "Who else?" "Jackson. Could you help me for a moment?" With those words, Brown, along with Jackson, disappeared with the bottle. Meanwhile, Aiden asked Anders, who was simmering with anger, "Is there friction with the snuff guys?" The snuff gang was as infamous for their vicious acts as their name suggested. Whether every member of the gang was sane or not, they randomly killed noticeable people and did gruesome things like cutting up the corpses and nailing them in front of their hideouts. These are people who literally breathe disgusting and crazy things. They were located deep in the woods, isolated from the city due to their particularly vile actions. But their atrocities continued. Do you have anyone without friction with those bastards? They're the kind of people who not only kill anyone they can get their hands on, but also kill their own children and hang them in frames. They're not the kind of people you can reason with. That's true. Why are you talking like it's someone else's story? You also have a grudge against those guys. About a year ago, you said you turned one of their outposts into a bloodbath. In the process, you even cut off the boss's brother's genitals. Anyway, you better be careful. Those guys are moving strangely these days. They might be planning to invade the city soon. It was an ominous statement, but to Aiden, it was valuable information. He etched the words he heard a while ago into his memory. And a little later, Jackson, who went with Brown, brought news. Both medications were genuine, and the deal had value. Good, the deal is done then. Now, provide the information. Anders first asked the people around. Then, lowering his voice a bit, he slowly spoke. It was about the mutants, right? Okay. The guy captured in Cleveland first. His name is the Vomiter. The Vomiter? Eat it? A zombie as fat as a pig. So, although it moves slowly, it's a crazy one that spits out disgusting bodily fluids like a fire hose from its mouth. If you get hit, you don't even bleed, you just turn into a zombie. Well, it's not related to you anyway. Besides, inside its belly, there's a deadly gas, so be careful when killing it. They said 3 people died of gas poisoning while hunting it in Cleveland. Well, this is unrelated to you too. Aiden nodded at Anders' words. Information about unknown mutants was always valuable, but if asked whether this was the information he was looking for, it wasn't. So, Aiden pressed on. Anything else? As I said, it's just eyewitness accounts. A mutant that sets up at night. They call it the Brutal. In simple terms, it's a zombie with incredibly strong muscles. It was seen in Baltimore, smashing a concrete wall with its bare hands. 4 guys with guns in the middle of the night all turned into minced meat and died. That's all the information we have. Aiden sighed briefly. In the end, both pieces of information were useful, but they didn't relate to vampires, especially Aryan. He thought a little while, wiping his helmet with one hand, then directly asked, "Have you heard anything about vampires?" "Vampires? Is it a new type of mutant?" It was Anders who asked instead. It seemed he didn't have any knowledge about it. If not, then forget it. Aiden's business was done here. Determining that there was no reason to stay any longer, he stood up immediately, but Anders stopped him by grabbing his shoulder. "Wait a moment. I have a favor to ask, not a personal one, but a request from our cooperative." "A favor?" It's not personal, but a request from our cooperative." The word cooperative caught Aiden's attention. "What is it?" "If you go a bit west from here, you'll find a communal graveyard. You know about it, right?" Aiden nodded. It would probably be called the Casson Memorial Park, a place where a part of the spacious park was turned into a graveyard. They've built a nest of the trapper mutants there. There are about 10 of them. At first, we tried to deal with it ourselves, but due to dealing with those snuff idiots, we ran out of people. So, we decided to entrust this task to a skilled junk dealer. That's you. Anders pointed at Aiden with a sly smile. The trappers were a type of mutant zombies. They dug shallowly into the ground and ambushed people inside. Among mutants, they weren't particularly threatening individually. However, if left unattended, they gathered zombies from the surroundings, gradually increasing their numbers and creating a minefield, where zombies popped out from all directions. When did you discover them? 3 days ago. So, the numbers probably haven't increased much. Also, the reward will be similar to last time. Is that okay? Sure, but you'll provide explosives, right? Of course. Anders immediately searched for a nearby box, pulled out 2 long sticks, and brought them. It was dynamite, commonly known as construction dynamite. Aiden accepted it and nodded. Got it. I'll let you know once it's done. The conversation ended there. Having accepted a new request, Aiden moved immediately. All right, let's see each other alive. As Anders said that to Aiden, who had already turned his back and was walking away, Aiden quietly raised one hand in response. After concluding the deal with Anders, Aiden's destination was his hideout, a 5-story apartment on the outskirts of Pittsburgh. Aiden, briefly looking up at the shabby exterior, stepped into the quiet entrance. It had been several hours since he left this hideout. While Aiden had multiple purposes for his outings, one of them was to buy time. Ever since he realized that Arian was a presence different from what he expected, he naturally considered distancing himself from her. Of course, Arian's utility had not diminished. Even though she wasn't a zombie or a human, Aiden was still quite interested in Arian's immunity that could withstand the zombie virus. However, despite that, Aiden eventually decided to give up on Arian. It was due to the inexplicable ability that Arian possessed. Aiden didn't feel confident about restraining someone who could use such magical abilities. So, Aiden, aware that Arian's restraints were loose, intentionally left her alone during his absence. During the few hours he was away, he hoped Arian would find a way to break free from the chains and leave quietly. The reason why he didn't release her directly and choose such a way was simple. By doing so, Aiden could avoid the risk of a direct confrontation with Arian. Moreover, it seemed like the safest option for both of them, as this intentional play would be secure from both perspectives. Still, Aiden quietly took out his gun as he climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor. He couldn't be certain if the result of this amateurish play would go as planned. Was there a guarantee that Arian, now freed, would gracefully leave? On the contrary, she might hold a grudge against him for confining her, and it was entirely possible that she might be hiding somewhere in this hideout, ready to attack him. So, Aiden climbed to the 3rd floor without letting his guard down. He still didn't sense any signs of movement nearby. The doors of the empty rooms also showed no signs of being opened, and this was true for the 4th floor as well. Now, only the 5th floor, where Aiden and Arian resided, remained. Did she leave quietly? Or is she confidently waiting for him on the 5th floor, as if she has nothing to hide? With these thoughts in mind, Aiden opened the door to the 5th floor where he had stayed and where Arian had been confined. He frowned at the completely unexpected sight. Arian was still there. However, she wasn't in a combat stance ready to attack him. Instead, she was rolling on the floor with the chair to which she had been tied. Ugh! Arian moaned with her face buried in the ground. The chains that Aiden hadn't released were still binding her. It seemed like she had attempted to escape, but only the chair was broken, and she had failed miserably. Observing her pitiful appearance, Aiden, without even aiming the gun, spoke first. What are you doing? Huh? Upon hearing Aiden's voice, Arian slowly turned her head, still groggy. Seeing her worm-like movements, a hollow laugh escaped Aiden's lips. Perhaps he had overestimated Arian. You came. Hey, untie this quickly. Seeing Aiden, Arian shouted impatiently, embarrassed by her own mistake. An unusual sense of urgency could be felt in her tone. So, Aiden asked, what's going on? Just untie me if you're going to. Quickly. I can't do that. Though Aiden had already lowered his evaluation of Arian by a step or two, he still wasn't willing to release her easily. Regardless of his expectations, she was still a threat. But after listening to Arian's continued plea, his determination wavered significantly. I need to go to the bathroom. Aiden didn't know, but Arian's situation was serious. Embarrassment, confusion, and a mixture of shame were evident on her face. To anyone who saw it, it was the expression of a desperate girl trying to maintain her dignity. Phew. Seeing her face, Aiden let out a deep sigh. At the same time, a small confusion settled in Aiden's mind. Was all this just a cunning play to release herself from captivity? Or is he merely tormenting a girl without reason? I have no choice. After a moment of contemplation, he decided to release Arian from her restraints. Even if it was the former, there was nothing to fear. If Arian had to resort to acting to the point of pretending to struggle with these chains, she couldn't be more powerful than a zombie mutant. And if it was the latter, well, there was nothing to think about. With a clicking sound, the locks that restrained the girl were released one by one, and until the last lock was opened, Aiden never let go of the gun in his hand. However, even with such precautions, Arian, as soon as the chains were released, hurriedly walked towards the door, and after glancing back, she earnestly asked, "Where's the bathroom?" "It's at the end of the hallway." Before his sentence was even finished, Arian disappeared in the direction of the bathroom. "See, crazy. It's crazy. What kind of bathroom is that?" After a while, Arian reappeared in front of the completely bewildered Aiden. She was expressing her dissatisfaction once again. The reason was that the so-called bathroom, or the space that used to be a bathroom, was that horrendous. Well, that couldn't be helped. The water supply in this apartment had long been cut off, and before Aiden settled here, some wanderers or scavengers had passed through this apartment. So, the bathroom in such an apartment was truly hellish. Is that so? However, Aiden just replied casually. He hadn't visited that so-called bathroom since the first day he came here. Zombies didn't need a bathroom, after all. But the only memory he had was that all kinds of debris had piled up to the toilet. I'll never go there again. And you? Never go there either. Whether Arian had developed a significant trauma from that or not, she grimaced with her face scrunched up. Staring at such Arian, Aiden calmly spoke. "So, why did you come back?" "Huh, now, you have no reason to stay with me." Arian's restraints were now removed. Aiden had no intention of confining her any longer, and it seemed that Arian also had no intention of fighting Aiden. Therefore, if Arian wanted, she could just leave, and it would be over. However, she chose to return to Aiden. Whether it was merely to vent her dissatisfaction or because of some unexpected reason, Arian began to reveal a different story. "I get it. I was going to leave anyway, you know? But when I saw the bathroom, I changed my mind." "Changed your mind?" "I felt a real sense of this world being messed up. Why she would feel that by looking at the bathroom was beyond Aiden's comprehension. But what followed in Arian's words was even more incomprehensible. "So, I've decided to stay with you for a while." "Ridiculous." Aiden flatly denied the statement. However, Arian didn't back down. "You're the one who caught me. Think of it as compensation. Compensation is more than enough with the food you've eaten. It's enough. Even prisoners in jail are given food. If you had just brought me here, that would have been obvious. Were you planning not to give me any?" It was an unexpected debate. While Aiden hesitated for a moment, Arian continued speaking. "I'm not planning to stay for long. It's not like I'll just be fooling around. I'll help when needed, and I'll pay for my meals. Think about it. If this is really a world I'm unfamiliar with, I need time to adapt and learn." It was only after listening up to this point that Aiden finally realized Arian's intention. She wanted to gain information about this world through accompanying Aiden. Double quotes. "So, you want to make a deal?" "Yeah, well, you can put it that way." Aiden's eyes narrowed. If this was a deal, there were only two things to consider: what he would give up and what he would gain in return. The former could be summarized as a bit of time, some annoyance, and an immeasurable level of risk. However, now that Arian's threat had considerably diluted, evidenced by her inability to break free from the chains and the minimum knowledge she possessed, through their conversation today, Aiden acknowledged that her danger was now limited. Arian's value as a trading partner was sufficient, given she was not a fanatic like those from a cult or a snuff gang. Just that fact alone qualified her as a potential trading partner. Moreover, what Aiden would receive in return was Arian's cooperation. Aside from her combat skills, she was immune to the zombie virus, and Aiden had a considerable interest in her. Why could she be bitten by zombies without any consequences? If he could utilize that immunity, he might be able to restrain the corrosion that was currently devouring him. In that case, Arian's value went beyond imagination. even if it was a bit of a gamble. Waiting a few days was a small price to pay. Okay, let's do that. So, Aiden agreed. Arian's face lit up in response. Great, then let's stick together for exactly 1 week. But that was too long. Aiden shook his head. 3 days, 6 days, 4 days. Fine, 5 days. Is that okay? That was enough time to invest. Aiden, judging it as such, accepted Arian's proposal. Smiling at the quickly concluded negotiation, Aiden asked Arian one question. But why did you decide to come along with me? He didn't need to say it out loud, but Aiden was a zombie. Moreover, he was a zombie who had restrained and confined an unconscious Arian. So why did this girl easily extend her hand for cooperation? The unexpected answer was surprisingly simple. Because it's safe. Safe? You tied me up tightly and didn't do anything to me. That's the most significant evidence. Arian focused on Aiden's actions after she was restrained, not the act of being restrained itself. It was a sensible judgment, though not a common way of thinking. Perhaps this girl had walked her own challenging path. According to the nonsense she had spouted, Arian had been involved in a war against a church organization. It was not a strange occurrence. Having drawn a conclusion to his doubts, Aiden checked the time. 1 p.m. It wasn't too late to go handle the new request he received. But was it right to handle this request, entangled with Arian? To that question, he nodded inwardly. This request, which involved suitable combat and moderate risk, could be considered a good opportunity. It was a perfect stage to test whether Arian was a trustworthy presence. Can we move right away? Now? Ide, didn't you say you wanted to learn about this world? Fine, then. Where are we going? To Arian's question, Aiden replied calmly. Zombie hunting. Afterward, the two left their hideout and headed south. Aiden's motorcycle, which would have been used on a regular day, was nowhere to be seen. Currently, the two were moving towards the city's outskirts on foot. You seemed like you were riding something earlier, didn't you? Arian pointed out shortly after they left the hideout. Although she couldn't see it, she distinctly remembered the sound of the motorcycle engine that had come right after Aiden left. If you don't want to die, don't think about using vehicles in the city, he firmly advised. The noise from the engine naturally attracted zombies. Of course, vehicles were faster than zombies, so if there was an empty road, ignoring zombies and driving along would be an option worth considering. But the road of this ruined city didn't fit it. The obstacles scattered across the roads and the buildings leaning on either side made driving challenging. The rain of zombies jumping from the buildings during the timing of a vehicle passing couldn't be avoided by driving skills alone. In fact, most of the overturned vehicles on the road were the result of foolish attempts at escape. Therefore, maneuvering through a city filled with zombies on a motorcycle was an unimaginable task under normal circumstances. It was a privilege possible only because the one driving was Aiden. Are zombies sensitive to sound? Ordinary zombies are. Ordinary? Mutants have different characteristics. Some don't have hearing but have an excellent sense of smell. Mutants. What are they? Exactly what it sounds like. Zombies that mutated. We don't know the cause of the mutation, but they are generally stronger and more dangerous than ordinary zombies. Even if their numbers aren't large, they are enemies to be careful of. Arian listened attentively, nodding seriously at Aiden's explanation. The area around their hideout was almost deserted, with only an apartment building in sight. As they walked on the quiet road, Aiden continued to explain the common knowledge of this world to Arian. It wasn't only for her sake, but also for Aiden himself. If this companion started to act recklessly, it would be troublesome, too. Ah, so being a junk dealer is a kind of troubleshooter. Is this also one of those requests? Something like that. Well, it suits you. But can you fight? Aiden asked. It was a question about whether she could be considered another force when this situation arose. In response, Arian confidently replied, Didn't you see yesterday? I can fight better than you. Aiden responded with a bitter smile. A little later, after the quiet street where their hideout was ended, a small forest appeared. Beyond the forest was a massive residential area. Passing through there and walking along a long road, they would finally reach the park. Their destination for the request, the communal cemetery. It was a journey of over 2 hours on foot, and during that time, many threats would lurk. The biggest threat among them was the residential area. Once a place named Shettenville where many people lived. It was a typical American residential area with 1 or 2-story wooden houses, lined along the streets. In that place, where many people once lived, there were still many zombies wandering around their homes. Let me repeat, follow my instructions here. Don't attack recklessly, Aiden warned just before entering the residential area. As if tired of the repeated admonitions, Arian answered with a slight frown. I told you I understood. And so, the two stepped into the eerily quiet residential area. The entrance to the residential area had a calm atmosphere. The straight road, surprisingly clear, seemed relatively clean compared to the commercial district or downtown. Furthermore, the houses lined along the road appeared to be in better condition than one might think, though some were rusty and broken. The signs of destruction painted over them were significantly fewer than the buildings in the city center. The reason was simple. There were almost no resources in the ordinary residential area compared to the commercial or busy districts. This made it less attractive to looters from the city. Meanwhile, due to their well-preserved appearance, the ghostly residential area basked in the bright sunlight at 1 p.m., making it seem peaceful. Various weeds grew in the gardens, and the warm spring sunlight filtering through the leaves created a fleeting scene. The sparkling sunlight invaded not only the outdoors, but also the interior of the houses. Sitting between the rows of trees in the garden, one scene reflected like a display shelf caught Arian's attention. A table in one of the kitchens. It was a 4-seater table with a few plates and utensils neatly arranged at each place setting. 2 were regular plates and utensils, while the remaining 2 were smaller dishes with characters drawn on them. Additionally, the chairs arranged according to those dishes were noticeably smaller than the other 2, barely fitting for a 5-year-old child. It truly was a scene overflowing with domesticity, if only the white dust covering it was absent. A scene of a family having a meal might naturally be painted even now. Perhaps the people who lived in this house hastily left while preparing a meal. Arian looked at Aiden, who was walking ahead. He wore only a flipped helmet, not riding a motorcycle this time. Sharply alert, he surveyed the surroundings. In his hands wasn't the usual shotgun, but a machete, specifically the type commonly known as a jungle machete. By the way, Arian also held a machete handed to her by Aiden, despite her objections. Just basic armament, he had said. Indeed, basic armament. Arian smiled bitterly, caressing the handle of the machete handed to her by Aiden. He really knew nothing about her or vampires. If this place truly was a world completely different from hers, it was only natural. But facing it so directly now was bewildering. Did those zombies really think of her as just an ordinary human girl? Well, she was lost in thought. Walking through the residential area, her sensitive senses picked up on something. Vampires possessed cognitive abilities that surpassed humans, especially in hearing and smell. What came into Arian's cognitive range was, unsurprisingly, moving rotten corpses. Moreover, the signals of those zombies sensed from afar weren't just 1, at least 20, at most twice that amount. Thinking she should inform Aiden, Arian glanced at him discreetly. If they continued walking like this, they would inevitably encounter the horde of zombies. But Aiden still seemed oblivious to the presence of the zombies. Naturally, given the distance to where the zombies were lurking was about 200 meters, and several abandoned houses blocked their line of sight. Both humans and zombies couldn't sense each other at such distances. Arian thought for a moment and then changed her mind. A mischievous smile appeared on her lips. This was an excellent opportunity to test the skills of the junk dealer, Aiden, who had boasted like a great professional in front of her. But would his skills match his words? So, without saying anything, Arian looked at Aiden and continued to walk. However, just a few steps later, Aiden suddenly stopped. His eyes were fixed on the garden of a certain house next to them. What's the matter? There are traces. Answering Arian's question, Aiden approached the fence surrounding the garden. The fence was broken and damaged in various places. Aiden pointed to one of the broken sections. See this? What he pointed out was the end of the broken fence. Now that she looked, there was a slight stain of decaying flesh. Aiden continued, recently broken by zombies. Probably a zombie in this garden witnessed a human or heard a loud noise. Saying that, Aiden examined the ground. Beyond the fence, clear traces of something rushing were vividly visible, and the continuation of those tracks precisely led southeast, the direction Aiden was heading, and the direction they needed to go. It seemed unusually quiet, but it looks like some fool gathered the zombies in one place. It's better to detour here. Saying so, Aiden naturally changed the path, while Arian nonchalantly followed him. Internally, she felt a considerable sense of amazement. Deep down, she wanted to see him flustered in front of the horde of zombies that had appeared before them. But perhaps it wasn't so simple to avoid the danger with just intuition. But even after that, Aiden didn't live up to Arian's expectations. He could discern if there were zombies inside a house just by looking at the broken front door or the rotten wooden floor. Before reaching a place where many zombies had gathered, he read their traces like a ghost and skillfully avoided them. Of course, occasionally, zombies appeared unexpectedly, even to Aiden. But that didn't surprise this man either. The head of a zombie, hidden under fallen leaves on the dried pool floor, flew away as the machete swung. It was a surprising appearance, enough to startle most people, but Aiden just moved mechanically in front of it. Perhaps because he was the same zombie? Internally mocking that, Arian couldn't help but acknowledge Aiden's skills. There was no sign of clumsiness in his actions or judgments. Undoubtedly, Aiden was quite a skilled survivor in this world as well, although it ended up being an uneventful encounter with just 5 zombies. Penetrating the vast residential area, Arian found the process intriguing as she assessed how many zombies were hiding among the many houses. Do you always find your way that well? As they exited the residential area onto a quiet road, Arian asked. Aiden casually replied, "It was a familiar place. Besides, it seems there were recent unwanted guests. That made it even easier to find." For him, it wasn't anything remarkable. Predicting the location of zombies was similar to hunters in the forest finding traces of prey and tracking their path based on knowledge and experience. In this case, since the creatures in the mountains didn't hide their traces and the left marks didn't get damaged, so anyone with observation skills could find traces of zombies. "You seem to know the location of the zombies as well." Just as Arian observed Aiden, he did the same. Arian nodded as if there was nothing to hide. "Yes, I knew. It's quite a useful ability. It makes survival easier." Arian thought he would at least make some sarcastic remark, but instead, Aiden calmly assessed her ability. "Anyway, he's a boring zombie." Thinking so, Arian looked around. What appeared after leaving the residential area was a 4-lane road. Around it, there were only grass and trees, and there didn't seem to be any particular danger. Arian spoke again. "But, is it normal for there to be no people here? I told you, it's a ruined city. Even considering the zombies, it's too empty. Shouldn't there be some sort of fortress made by the military or refugees, even in a place like this?" Arian mentioned a movie she had once seen while pondering. Pittsburgh, where they were, was originally the second largest city in Pennsylvania, with a population once reaching 300,000. Even if only 10% of the people survived the zombie crisis, there should still be 30,000 people here. However, Arian hadn't seen a single person, not even a trace of people. Even if it's ruined, isn't this too severe? In response to Arian's doubt, Aiden nodded as if understanding. This place isn't far from the origin of the virus. Most survivors turned into refugees and left. The only ones left here are those who died or those who turned late. Where's the origin? New York. It spread from there throughout the United States. So, the entire northeast of the United States is practically empty. Although New York and Pittsburgh were 500 kilometers apart, in terms of the entire United States, they could be considered relatively close cities. Nodding to herself, Arian suddenly realized something and continued her questions. "Wait, so, is there something on the other side?" "That's right." "Are you sure?" "Well, it might not be complete nonsense. There are sporadic radio broadcasts. They seem to be calling refugees from all over the United States to LA. I don't know their intentions, but considering they're broadcasting even to places like this, there's a good chance there's a large organization nearby." Upon hearing that, Arian's eyes quietly lit up. However, Aiden immediately denied that hope. It's better to dismiss unnecessary expectations, even if it's true. Believing in rumors like that won't help here. "What are you talking about? Most refugees who can't pass through those residential areas end up dead. But believing in radio broadcasts to cross the entire United States? They must be really good." Pittsburgh and LA, or Los Angeles, are cities on opposite sides of the United States. The distance between them is almost 4,000 kilometers, a level of traversing the continent. Even in the pre-apocalyptic world, it would take nearly 40 hours of driving to reach there. How could an ordinary refugee, avoiding zombies everywhere, manage to traverse that distance and arrive in LA? "I think I can do it." Arian said it lightly, but Aiden chuckled as if it wasn't worth responding. "I see a park. Let's stop the nonsense here." Aiden, who had reached the entrance of the park where there was supposed to be a cemetery, glanced around. It was a park sloping down a low hill, surrounded mostly by a forest with hardly any noticeable buildings nearby. Considering the distance from residential areas and commercial districts, it was unlikely that zombies would gather here even if there were some noise. Aiden, making this judgment, took out his pistol. "Do you know how to shoot?" "I know how, but it's not necessary." Aiden nodded at Arian's refusal. He couldn't hand a gun to someone who disliked it, even though she might handle a machete. After instructing Arian to follow him, Aiden walked ahead. The park area was quite spacious. Originally covered with grass, it was now overrun with weeds, and trees stood as if encircling the grassy field. Because of this, the view of the park was obstructed, making it hard to see at a glance, but it didn't give a feeling of being cramped. Moreover, the concrete path laid between the trees was still intact. Probably, if they followed that path, they could easily reach the cemetery inside the park. Aiden walked on the path covered with fallen leaves, entering the interior of the park. At the park entrance, there were no signs of zombies yet, only old benches, surrounded by overgrown grass and giving off a lonely atmosphere due to long neglect. Welcomed them, but after just a few minutes of walking, they soon discovered something peculiar inside the park. "What is that?" The location was supposed to be a cemetery where graves were lined up. However, all the graves had been pulled out of the ground, the soil had been churned up, and only black earth resembling internal organs was exposed instead of the green grass. Also, in the center, there were deep holes where two adults could easily fit. The area around the holes was cluttered with rotten branches and bits of cloth, looking like a chaotic gateway to hell. "It's a trapper's nest. Trappers dig wide tunnels under the ground, centered around those holes," Aiden explained while cautiously moving forward. "So, zombies are underground?" "That's right. By any chance, do you know about trapdoor spiders?" It was a type of spider that supposedly existed in Australia. These spiders dug tunnels into the ground, created a cover for their holes with dirt or leaves to camouflage them as ordinary ground, and when prey passed by, they would suddenly open the disguised cover and ambush their prey. The zombies called trappers exhibited a similar behavior, only the central hole was exposed outward. All the other ambush holes extended like spider silk, were disguised as undisturbed ground. Moreover, the level of their camouflage was quite clever, to the point that even Aiden might not easily discern it. But hearing Aiden's explanation, Arian subtly furrowed her brow. "There doesn't seem to be any zombies around, strangely." Oddly enough, no zombies fell within her perception range. Whether it was because their concealment skills were excellent, or it was just a simple illusion, Aiden neither affirmed nor denied Arian's words. For some reason, those trappers protected those central holes as if they were their lives. So, if they exploded just one of those nests, they wouldn't need to search for each trapper to prove Arian's words. "We'll find out soon." "So," Aiden said and moved forward. In his hand, there was suddenly a stick of dynamite. Arian, setting foot in the cemetery, felt a strange discomfort emanating from below her feet and grimaced. The ground, unearthed by the trappers, was no longer firm. The surface lacked strength, feeling as though walking on a pile of crumpled paper. Even just walking left distinct footprints, and with a slight push of the foot, it felt like the ground might collapse entirely. With the ground like this, showing agile movements when needed was difficult. Perhaps the zombie called a trapper set traps like this, hunting humans who unknowingly entered. On the other hand, Aiden, who was ahead, was carefully advancing on such ground. However, even when he got somewhat closer to the nest, there was no sign of zombies popping out. Could it be that the trappers had abandoned the nest, just as Arian had said? If that were the case, it was a very strange occurrence. As far as Aiden knew, those moles never voluntarily abandoned their nests. To confirm this, he lit the dynamite. If this explosive meant for collapsing tunnels exploded, it would destroy the trappers' nests in one go. "Step back." Having thrown the dynamite into the hole, Aiden said and stepped back. Just after they secured a safe distance, boom! With a loud noise, soil erupted from the trapper's nest. The circular hole that led underground collapsed, and the peculiar structures decorating its surroundings lost their form and collapsed as well. After a while, in the place where the dust settled, only a large crater-like imprint remained. However, even so, there was no sign of the monsters hiding underground emerging. Only then was Aiden certain. Indeed, this nest had been abandoned. Strange. According to Anders, who gave him this request, trappers had been discovered just 3 days ago. However, in the meantime, all the trappers seemed to have left their nests. At least to Aiden, it was an inexplicable occurrence. While contemplating this alone, Arian spoke to him. If it's so strange, why not investigate? She wasn't wrong. Thinking alone wouldn't lead to a conclusion. If he was determined to unravel this mystery, it was right to find traces of the trappers now, then track them afterward. But that was also going beyond the scope of the request. Even though there were no trappers, the nests had been destroyed. Aiden could just go back, report the results, and demand his reward. However, he felt a sense of urgency that the trappers had deviated from his expectations. The most crucial factor for Aiden was prior knowledge, since ordinary zombies, not to mention numerous mutants, had various characteristics. Understanding their strengths and weaknesses was a key strategy for preserving one's life in critical moments. However, such knowledge couldn't be gained by sitting idle. Simply not dismissing this abnormality as mere chance was the beginning. That's why Aiden couldn't just let this unexpected movement of the trappers go. Perhaps hidden within these seemingly insignificant movements was a lifeline that would save him later. Let's look into it a bit. So, Aiden left the cemetery with the nest and circled its outskirts. Then, it wasn't difficult to notice traces of the trappers crawling, since they were always underground. Traces of black mud-like footprints were naturally left where the trappers had passed. It hasn't been long since they moved. Muttering to himself as he observed the mud footprints on top of the weeds, Aiden continued. The clumps of mud that had fallen on the weeds hadn't completely dried yet. At most, a day might have passed. Also, judging by the number of footprints, it wasn't the movement of just one or two individuals. Everyone from the nest seemed to have moved simultaneously, as if it were a planned event. This direction. South, is it? Aiden looked towards the direction where the footprints continued. The black footprints were all leaving the cemetery, crossing the road beyond, and descending below the hill. Confirming this, Aiden furrowed his brow. Descending the hill and passing through a shallow plain would lead to a small village, with about 10 houses. And once you passed through that village, it led to a large forest completely beyond the outskirts of the city. The problem was that this forest was directly under the influence of the Snuff Gang. Although it wasn't their officially constructed and occupied area, if luck was bad, they might run into their patrols. The gang members were always armed with rifles, making them formidable opponents even when alone. And in a situation like now where Arian was also present, they were even more unwelcome. Going too deep was inappropriate. The risk exceeded the utility of the knowledge he might gain. So, Aiden decided to investigate only up to the village. Let's move. Aiden turned to Arian and said. They followed the signs left by the trappers to the south. Soon, the village came into view. Along the 2-lane road in the center, buildings were widely spaced with a gap of several tens of meters between each. The footprints of the trappers, who had passed through here, seemed to pay no attention to such vacant houses and continued straight through the village. The scene continued with a quiet and lonely landscape like any other residential area, but not for long. When they passed a little beyond the center of the village, the previously silent carnage revealed itself. First, what was disturbed was the trappers' footprints. The neatly continuing footprints were now chaotically mixed, and on the ground were strange wounds as if a giant hammer had struck in various places. The dark liquid seeping into the ground. It was undoubtedly the bodily fluid of the trappers. Something that had trampled the ground had apparently crushed the trappers along with it. Even Aiden, who was not an expert at distinguishing between the scents of zombies, could tell that this was the unmistakable trace of a clear battle. Having noticed this, Aiden tilted his head slightly. In this small village bordering the Snuff Gang's territory, which was now a small number of remaining buildings, there was almost nothing left. Therefore, Snuff members, as well as the few survivors remaining in other gangs or the city, rarely bothered to come to this village. But a battle? Could it be that the Snuff guys came out of the forest? However, as Aiden examined the ground traces, he inwardly shook his head. The remaining traces were awkward for being created by humans and zombies. To put it differently, these were traces of a fight between beasts. Snuff Gang members who knew how to use guns wouldn't engage in close combat, and even if they did, there was not a drop of human blood visible on the ground. So, observing this, Aiden raised his gaze slightly. Beyond the traces of the chaotic battle, he looked in the direction they continued. The traces deviated from the road and were heading towards a warehouse building about 50 meters away. On the sign in front of the building, there was a smiling cow drawing. It might have originally been a place selling meat. If that was the case, the place was probably a warehouse for storing such products. Also, There were no traces leading from that warehouse to elsewhere. In other words, if there was something, it was probably hidden inside that warehouse, concealed behind the white exterior wall. So, Aiden turned to Arian. "What's inside there, Ida?" Arian responded immediately, seemingly peering into the place. She opened her mouth. "But, there's a somewhat different smell." Aiden nodded in agreement, even though the metaphor of a different smell wasn't very relatable to him, who lacked the talent to distinguish zombies by scent. Whatever was there, it probably wasn't an ordinary threat. "Are you going?" "It looks dangerous. That's why I'm going," Aiden said as if it were obvious. This place was not far from his hideout. Just turning a blind eye to it because it seemed dangerous could be even more fatal. That makes sense too. Upon this, Arian lightly agreed. The building they reached was a warehouse over 5 meters high. The entire site was quite spacious compared to other butcher shops in the small village. Perhaps it was a place engaged in wholesale rather than retail. The front-facing door was firmly closed. Without a single window, nothing could be seen inside. However, they didn't need to worry about how to get inside. The traces of the monsters continued towards the side of the building. Moreover, there was a large entrance created when the exterior wall collapsed. There it is. First, they stood some distance away from the entrance and observed inside. But all that could be seen immediately was darkness. Unfortunately, the entrance was facing away from the sun. Aiden's eyes narrowed at this. Is there no choice but to go in directly? Internally sighing at that thought, Aiden slung his shotgun and illuminated the end with the attached light. Then, he walked slowly towards the entrance. As he illuminated the inside of the warehouse from the entrance, the first thing that caught his eye was a long wall of rotten meat, stretched out like a screen. Originally, it was edible meat stored in this warehouse. Now, those products were completely dried and decomposed, hanging on hooks like dead bodies. Swaying, Arian's eyebrows trembled slightly at this eerie scene. Although the warehouse itself had a structure with holes, the view was blocked due to the rotten meat. Fortunately, or unfortunately, the thing they were chasing seemed to have created a clear path while passing through the warehouse. Starting from the center of the entrance, the curtain of rotten meat split on both sides like servants stepping aside for a king's procession. Beneath it lay the shredded remains of the trappers, like a black carpet. Aiden calmly stepped into the darkness. After walking about 10 meters like that, the path turned 90 degrees in the middle, leading further inside the warehouse. Aiden followed this path with only the light attached under the gun. Upon illuminating the dark, the light extended far, finally clearly revealing the figure of the one who had created this path. About 15 meters ahead, resting against the tightly closed front door of the warehouse, it was a 3-meter-sized lump of rotten flesh. Bigfoot. Aiden muttered the name of this mutant zombie, a monstrous creature that, despite being a variant of zombies, preyed on humans and even its own kind, growing in size. Perhaps it was named after the monstrous creature it became. Raarg, the one who sensed the light roared, a distorted scream created by a stifled vocal cord. In addition to the gruesome appearance of the creature, Arian's forehead frowned. Its face resembled that of a drowned person, swollen and distorted. Covered in swollen flesh, its facial features were buried. The bloated abdomen seemed about to burst at any moment, filled with scars, and its massive lower body, as enlarged as the given name Bigfoot, supported the body. More than the smell emanating from it, the appearance was several times more horrifying. Bang! Immediately after, Aiden's shotgun spewed flames. The fierce gunshot shook the warehouse, and about 10 lead balls charged towards Bigfoot. However, the ferocious shotgun fire, which had torn apart multiple zombies at once, did not inflict significant damage on Bigfoot. Most of the bullets were simply absorbed into the flesh, and the impact only momentarily made Bigfoot stagger. Get out! But that was enough. Aiden didn't think from the start that the shotgun would be effective against Bigfoot. The purpose of this fierce attack was simply to buy time. The battlefield of this warehouse was too narrow to face such an enemy as Bigfoot. At Aiden's shout, Arian immediately responded. They turned around and ran simultaneously, and as if on cue, they quickly left the entrance of the warehouse. Immediately after that, boom, like a projectile, the huge hand that chased after them swept over the entrance. Beneath the thick flesh, sharp claws like bones hidden beneath, roughly shaved through the ground. Contrary to the seemingly sluggish appearance of Bigfoot, the speed was absolutely incongruent, and Arian burst into laughter at the absurdity. TSK. Aiden, who had exited the warehouse, clicked his tongue. He anticipated the presence of zombie mutants, but of course, it had to be Bigfoot. The situation wasn't favorable. Among the mutants, Bigfoot had mid or even low-level power, but unfortunately, with the armament Aiden had brought, it was incredibly challenging to confront him. Currently, the weapons he had were, excluding the cold weapons, a shotgun, a pistol, a revolver, and finally, one stick of dynamite. Among them, the shotgun, responsible for the main firepower, wasn't particularly suitable for Bigfoot. While it excelled in taking down small mutants like regular zombies or trappers, due to its excellent anti-personnel stopping power, it sacrificed penetration power. Thus, it was almost ineffective against Bigfoot's thick skin. The dynamite, while having some firepower, was scarce, and due to the nature of a thrown weapon, it was difficult to hit the target. So, unless you were extremely lucky, it was right to expect to eliminate him with a single shot of dynamite. So, what remained? The pistol and the revolver? First, the pistol was an automatic one that supported automatic reloading, loaded with 9mm standard bullets. Moreover, there were ample magazines, allowing for some sustained gunfire. The revolver had 7N31, a 9mm armor-piercing bullet. It was a high-penetrating pistol bullet with more gunpowder than regular bullets. He had brought this armament, thinking of dealing with trappers who used steel plates as doors. However, at present, it had become the only means to smash Bigfoot's skull and scramble the brain inside. There were only 6 of these armor-piercing bullets in the revolver. Aiden had to be careful with every shot. He slung the shotgun back and first drew the automatic pistol. Although 9mm standard bullets seemed infinitely smaller compared to Bigfoot's mass, they were better than the shotgun as they could reach the bones beneath the skin. Meanwhile, Bigfoot, who had aggressively pursued them to the entrance, paused for a moment. This was due to the thick leather caught on the protruding side of the outer wall. However, the poorly constructed warehouse couldn't keep Bigfoot confined for long. With a roaring noise, the warehouse's outer wall crumpled like foil. He would arrive shortly. Sensing this, Aiden turned to Arian and asked in a low voice, "Can you fight?" Arian was still right next to Aiden. If a battle broke out, Aiden couldn't guarantee Arian's safety. However, noticing his concern, Arian chuckled and replied, "I'll take care of my own life." Receiving such a confident response, Aiden gave a faint smile. It was natural to feel fear when facing monsters like Bigfoot, which were not ordinary zombies. However, it seemed that fear didn't apply to Arian. Rawrg! At that moment, completely crushing the warehouse's outer wall, Bigfoot finally surged in like a tidal wave of rotten meat. In the blink of an eye, Bigfoot approached them, and its grotesque head came close to Aiden's face. What came with its monstrous roar was the flesh cudgel. Its speed was almost as fast as a whip, and the power imbued in it was something a human couldn't withstand. However, Aiden was already reacting. He leaped to the side, narrowly avoiding the trajectory of the cudgel. Bigfoot's sharp claws brushed past Aiden's nose. While the disgusting storm created by the decaying flesh enveloped Aiden, he aimed the pistol at Bigfoot's head with a cold gaze. Bang! Bang! Gunshots echoed. Aiden skillfully avoided Bigfoot's attacks, emptied the 10-round magazine in an instant. However, despite the hail of bullets, Bigfoot was unfazed. Due to the lack of penetration power and not so high accuracy, only 2 out of the 10 shots hit the head, and those couldn't break through the sturdy skull. The rest either completely missed or hit non-lethal areas like the neck or shoulder. At this, Aiden frowned. Engaging in combat with Bigfoot, who was rampaging like a mad boar, and hitting its head wasn't an easy task. He needed to somehow increase the accuracy to make use of the armor-piercing bullets in the revolver. So, should he create an opportunity using dynamite, even if he had to? That's when he had such thoughts. What? Unexpectedly, there was an interruption between Aiden and Bigfoot. It was Arian. But what exactly was she thinking? Her action of rushing headlong, without any strategy, was not just reckless. It was downright bewildering. Hoo-ah! Bigfoot reacted to Arian, who suddenly appeared between Aiden and him. The fist of the creature, capable of crushing buildings, slashed through the air. It was too late to dodge, Aiden thought. However, at that moment, with Aiden's hollow laughter, Arian was leaping into the air. To leap to meters in a single bound wasn't something that could be explained by mere martial arts. But that wasn't all. Arian, in mid-air, kicked once again. She landed unseen footholds in the air and, like an arrow, shot towards Bigfoot. Swish! At such a processed speed, her machete sliced deeply into Bigfoot's flesh. Bigfoot let out a roar filled with anger. but Arian frowned as she wiped her hand. That thing, its bones are incredibly tough. Can't cut through it right now. Arian spat out discontentedly towards Aiden. The thickness of Bigfoot's arm was comparable to that of a pretty hefty wild boar. Was that all she thought it would take to cut through it with a machete? Well, Aiden chuckled at Arian's confidence. He calmly analyzed her strength. The machete she was wielding demonstrated a power surpassing a simple sword. To split Bigfoot's skin to the point of revealing bones in a single strike. Perhaps even an ordinary person could achieve it with a chainsaw. But even more surprising was her physical ability. Easily evading Bigfoot's onslaught was. It could be a more useful skill than her attacking power. While Aiden was contemplating this, Bigfoot rushed at Arian. However, she once again skillfully dodged Bigfoot's attacks, making it look effortless. Hey, do something. Doesn't it have any weaknesses? Arian asked. To the following question, Aiden nodded. With Arian's strength, he was confident they could deal with Bigfoot more easily than expected. The weakness is its head. The head. It's the weakness of all zombies. To bring it down, you need to either pierce through the skull or cut the neck bone. Arian's expression slightly stiffened at Aiden's words. Bigfoot's bones were almost as hard as stone, so even Arian couldn't cut through it easily. However, that wasn't something she needed to do. I'll take care of that. Instead, draw its attention. How do I do that? Anything will do, even for a moment. Just keep its head from moving. After some thought, Arian nodded. Got it. Then Arian once again plunged towards Bigfoot. As she cut through its huge leg, Arian began luring Bigfoot in the opposite direction of Aiden. That place was towards the warehouse building where Bigfoot had hiding. Then Bigfoot chased after Arian, shaking the earth. Bigfoot's back was full of small wounds. It wasn't made by Arian or Aiden, but by trappers. It seems that Bigfoot had a fight with the trappers here, and eventually preyed on them and hid in the warehouse. With Bigfoot's attention completely on Arian, Aiden took out his revolver. Seeing Arian's movement, Aiden had already read her intentions. What Arian intended to use was the collapsed warehouse itself. As Aiden expected, Arian deliberately lured Bigfoot's attack near the collapsed outer wall. Bigfoot swung its arm, attempting to catch Arian flying like an annoying fly, but it only struck the damaged outer wall of the annoying warehouse. Then, the already unstable warehouse shook greatly. Just before the building collapsed, Arian leaped into the inner side of the collapsed outer wall. It was an appropriate move to lure the crazed Bigfoot, but to Aiden, it was a move that was difficult to imagine, because if the warehouse collapsed like this, she would be crushed as well. However, Arian ultimately fought with Bigfoot inside the warehouse, and in the end, one of the pillars supporting the warehouse broke due to the aftermath. At that moment, finally, the seam of the panel on the opposite wall couldn't withstand the weight and bent. Following the strained sound of metal forcibly bending, the entire warehouse tilted and began to collapse from the spot. Even Bigfoot, who was furiously tumbling like a log, couldn't escape the collapse. As if being swept away by an avalanche, Bigfoot collapsed beneath the logs. Aiden carefully observed the scene. There was no sign of Arian emerging before the warehouse collapsed, meaning she too was buried under the wreckage along with Bigfoot. However, unlike the quiet Arian, Bigfoot didn't remain silent. Even in its state buried under the debris, the creature, glowing several times, slowly raised the heavy ceiling above its head, akin to a massive crane. But what came into the slowly rising Bigfoot's eyes was a silvery revolver pointed at him. Bang! With the dry sound of a gunshot, Bigfoot's body swayed significantly. The 9mm armor-piercing bullet pierced through the center of Bigfoot's forehead, penetrating its brain. However, Bigfoot didn't fall. As if the small hole in its brain wasn't much, it raised the debris that trembled with its shaky arm towards Aiden. In response, the revolver expelled bullets continuously. The remaining 5 rounds were cleanly fired, shattering Bigfoot's brain without any error. A moment of silence. In the end, Bigfoot, a beat late, emitted its final groan and sank under the debris once again. And it never moved again. Aiden confirmed Bigfoot's death and approached the wreckage of the warehouse. It was to find Arian, who was beneath it. Arian, where are you? No response. Instead, there was a thumping sound, as if someone was tapping on a panel. The sound came from the end of the debris. Compared to the central part where Bigfoot was buried, there was much less debris covering the top. It seems she found a way out even as the warehouse was collapsing. Aiden started removing the debris one by one, and soon Arian's figure appeared. Are you okay? Cough. Do I look okay? Arian, who barely emerged from the wreckage, was a mess. Covered in dust all over her body, her clothes were torn, and her left arm was broken. Injury? Oh, this. Don't worry about it. I'll heal on my own, Arian said, waving off Aiden's concern. Come to think of it, Arian healed from the zombie bite wounds within a few minutes. Aiden recalled that memory and erased the worry that rose in his mind. Instead, he remembered Arian's achievements this time. Quite impressive. It was a sincere compliment from Aiden. It wasn't just about her fighting skills. Going into the collapsing building, facing the nemesis like Bigfoot, regardless of being strong or weak, was undoubtedly her sacrifice. Although there was a corner of his mind believing she wouldn't die, Aiden knew it wasn't an easy task. On the other hand, Arian responded casually to his words. I told you, I will pay for the food. More importantly, is this the end of the job? Seems like it. Then let's go back quickly. I'm a bit tired. Arian stretched with one arm. Her attitude seemed strangely familiar, and Aiden asked a question. Have you done something like this before? Edith, I briefly worked as a problem solver in the old days. In the world I came from, there were weird things, monsters like that. I mainly dealt with those. Arian briefly conveyed the story of her world to Aiden. Without him realizing, her seemingly frivolous story no longer sounded like nonsense. As Aiden and Arian returned to their hideout, the sky was dyed with the colors of the setting sun. Due to the delay caused by tracking Bigfoot, Aiden decided to postpone receiving the reward for the mission until tomorrow. Instead, he set up a table and called Arian to sit down. It was to study her blood. You make medicine? Arian, munching on canned food with her fully recovered arms, tilted her head in response to his words. It's not exactly medicine. You could say it's more like a neutralizer. Saying so, he took out a large syringe from the bag beside him. Even at a glance, it showed signs of being used multiple times. As you can see, I am infected with the zombie virus, yet I maintain my sanity. It's because the virus hasn't completely eroded my brain. HMM. Is that a common occurrence? Of course not. I've never seen a case like mine, except for myself. Arian nodded her head. Aiden had been speaking sensibly from the beginning, so there weren't many times she found him strange. Yet, thinking calmly, his existence was quite peculiar. He was a man fighting against zombies, dealing with humans, despite being a zombie himself. But that doesn't mean the virus is dormant. It's still constantly trying to erode my brain. The role of this neutralizer is to delay that process. Saying so, Aiden demonstrated the process of making the neutralizer in front of Arian. First, he inflicted a wound on his arm to extract the green zombie fluid. Then, he heated it as it was. When the green fluid dried up and turned reddish, he took out a healthy human's blood pack and mixed it with the zombie's fluid. What's the point of doing something like that? Isn't it a waste of blood? This is how you make a neutralizer. Aiden, placing the liquid he made into the large syringe he always used, injected it into his own neck. Arian sighed and looked at the liquid that continued to enter his throat. Does it really work? Common sense would tell you that. If it weren't for this, I would have been no different from the corpses wandering out there by now. Aiden began to explain the principles. The virus first attacks the human blood that enters the body. Therefore, when a human is bitten by a zombie, the blood is contaminated first, and the virus spreads throughout the body through that blood. Aiden's neutralizer took advantage of this reaction in reverse. To divert the attention of the viruses attacking the brain, he injected human blood into the body. As a result, the erosion of the brain is significantly delayed until the injected blood becomes completely contaminated. However, the neutralizing effect of ordinary human blood was too short-lived. So, he discovered that when he mixed heated zombie fluid with human blood, the virus's contamination time was extended, leading to the current method. So, you had human blood because of that. That's right. And for that reason, I want to experiment with your blood as well. Experiment? You're not going to draw my blood and inject it into yourself, are you? I might. Arian made a disgusted expression. However, since she had agreed to cooperate with Aiden, she couldn't refuse this role. She reluctantly nodded, expressing her consent. But before that, I have a question. What is it? You said you're a vampire, right? Then, if I inject your blood, could I also become a vampire? Aiden asked seriously. He had finally admitted that Arian was a vampire, but in his limited knowledge, the method vampires used to increase their kin wasn't much different from zombies. Nevertheless, Arian looked slightly uncomfortable and shook her head. No, I can't. Why not? Even if I tell you, you might not understand. Still, I want to hear it. Aiden mentally prepared himself. From now on, he vaguely anticipated what Arian was going to say. However, I received the blood of the original, the first vampire. But I'm not a legitimate successor who received that blood directly from the original. I'm a vampire artificially created by humans who killed the original. So, I've received certain restrictions in blood succession, and as a result, I've lost the abilities that vampires should inherit. The explanation that came out of Arian's mouth went beyond Aiden's expectations. Just heard it for no reason. Although the thought briefly crossed Aiden's mind, he soon nodded and opened his mouth. Anyway, even if I receive your blood or get bitten by you, it doesn't mean I'll become a vampire, right? You got it right. Yeah, that's what it means. In response to that answer, Aiden let out a small sigh. Then, he took out a clean blood collection set from the bag beside him. Well, let's start by drawing some blood. Reluctantly, Arian nodded in response to Aiden's request. She extended one arm, and the needle of the syringe pierced her blood vessel. Feeling the sharp sensation, she frowned and opened her mouth. But do you have anything for me to eat? Are 2 cans of canned food not enough? It's not about food. I'm talking about blood. Aiden's gaze, while drawing blood, turned to Arian. By the way, I forgot to ask, what happens if you can't consume human blood? What do you mean, what happens? I'll die, of course. Though Arian spoke as if it were obvious, it wasn't such a natural thing for Aiden. After all, weren't vampires creatures that existed only in imagination in this world? So, he asked the question. Then, how much is needed for survival? Well, if we assume I drank about as much as yesterday, I can last about a week without doing anything. Does that mean there are conditions where more blood is needed? Arian let out a sigh as the continued questions seemed to tire her, but she dutifully answered Aiden's question. That's right. My powers, magic, and regenerative ability all consume human blood. So, in simpler terms, if I fight like I did earlier, I'll need more blood. So, how much was consumed today? About 5 days worth, I guess? At that, Aiden clicked his tongue briefly. The blood he gave Arian yesterday was 200 milliliters. With that, she could last for 7 days, but it decreased by 5 days after just one battle. Considering that regular blood donations consume 400,500 milliliters of blood, and the donor needs an 8-week recovery period afterward, Arian was undoubtedly a formidable force, but unfortunately, her fuel efficiency wasn't great. Assuming she fought every day, it meant he would need nearly dozens of donors. Is there no more blood than that? Nope. But anyway, I plan to replenish it tomorrow, so endure until then. Tomorrow? Arian's eyes glowed with anticipation. She must have sensed that she could finally meet a human in this world, who wasn't a zombie like Aiden. So, your business is done? With those words, Arian stood up. Aiden had temporarily arranged for her to use a different room on the 5th floor. There was no reason for Arian to stay with him during the night, so it was only natural. Keep it quiet at night. As I said, no lighting fires either. I told you, I know. Saying that, Arian closed Aiden's door and left. Aiden briefly watched her leaving and then looked at the syringe containing Arian's blood. With about an hour left until sunset, he began to execute several experiments he had thought of during that time. The next day, Aiden revisited the merchant cooperative to receive the reward for the mission, and the one who greeted him with an unusually enthusiastic welcome was, of course, Anders. Oh my goodness. Have my eyes finally gone bad? Aiden is bringing a girl. Keep your mouth shut, Anders. No, it's not about cheddar or not. It's just a fact. Does a zombie need a girlfriend? Is that what's going on in the world? Anders whispered such gossip to Aiden, who had just entered the barrier. Aiden opened his mouth with a short sigh. She's a survivor I met while solving your quest. I only brought her here because she needed some help. Survivor, Anders said as he glanced toward Arian, who was still outside the barrier. Is that woman the one you guarantee? Aiden shook his head in response. No, I don't guarantee anything. Really? If I were to give you advice, she's a dangerous woman. Dangerous? In what way? Aiden explained to Anders the combat capabilities of Arian that he knew. She could split zombies with her nails, cut through mutants with a knife, and leap to meters high. Upon hearing this, Anders' expression strangely twisted. Aiden, did you take some kind of drug? I clearly stated the facts, whether you believe it or not. The rest is up to you to figure out. No, what are you suddenly trying to do? Although Anders spoke as if it were absurd, Aiden remained silent. In response, Anders sighed and turned to look at Arian. Despite the numerous gun barrels lined up in front of the barrier, Arian showed no fear at all, clearly indicating that she was no ordinary girl. However, connecting that to the transcendent abilities Aiden mentioned was another matter. It just didn't make sense, at least not as a joke. However, it was hard to believe that Aiden was just making fun of him. Aiden was the most distant human. No, zombie, from jokes or pranks. If he had to choose between thinking he was joking or thinking he was crazy, it was wiser to go with the latter. So, TSK, tongue clicking, Anders approached Aiden and beckoned several gang members over to confront Arian. Although Aiden's words couldn't be taken at face value, at least Anders had judged that the girl was a dangerous presence. The gang members went outside the barrier and surrounded Arian. As Arian looked at them with a puzzled expression, a woman with a rifle among them stepped forward and gestured to Arian. It was an indication for her to follow for inspection. Do I really have to do this? The fact that a body search was required to enter the barrier, established by the merchant cooperative, was already something Aiden had mentioned. Only a handful of individuals, such as executives of the cooperative who were vouched for by the association, could be exempted. It's a safety check. Just go quietly. So Aiden told Arian. Arian frowned, entered a makeshift tent near the barrier, and the gang members stood guard around her sternly. Body searches checked whether weapons were hidden, or if there were marks from being bitten by zombies. Since Arian had neither, as long as she came back quietly, there would probably be no trouble. Meanwhile, while Arian was temporarily away, Anders spoke up. So, what's the deal with that young lady? She's a vampire. What? Anders exclaimed. But Aiden didn't want to provide detailed explanations about that. So, he simply conveyed the essential information that Anders should be aware of. I don't know much either, but, as I said, she's a dangerous woman. Why did you bring that danger here? I brought her, but whether to accept her or not is up to you. If you want, I don't mind letting her wait outside the barrier. As this merchant cooperative space was for business, even newcomers could enter the barrier. However, all visitors here could not possess weapons within the barrier and had to prove their safety through inspections. In other words, only a very small number of individuals, such as those vouched for by the cooperative's executives, could possess weapons within this place. On the flip side, this meant that these people were responsible for maintaining the security here. Anyway, what are we supposed to do? Anders scratched his head. I don't know exactly, but there are no exceptions to the cooperative rules. If there's no problem with the inspection, accept her, otherwise, she can't come in. With a firm tone, Aiden nodded calmly. With that, the topic concluded, and Anders brought up another matter. By the way, have you already taken care of all the trappers? Actually, there's a problem with that. In short, things went wrong. Really? Okay, when that girl comes out, let's talk in a quiet place. After a while, Arian came out of the tent looking tired, and the woman who had entered with her nodded to Anders. The result of the inspection was that there were no issues. For now, let her in, and you three follow her behind. Upon this command, Anders immediately gave instructions to his members. Thus, with Anders, Aiden, and the gang members as an escort, Arian entered the warehouse inside the barrier, away from the hustle and bustle, where only a few people were moving cargo. There, Anders, still keeping the rifle-bearing guard slightly behind, sat Aiden and Arian at a table. Anders glanced at Arian but found no indication of displeasure from her. However, Anders, still vigilant of Arian, opened his mouth. So, tell us, what happened with the request? To this question, Aiden began to explain in detail the events from when he discovered the trapper's nest. There was a Bigfoot. This is the evidence. Aiden pulled out a fist-sized yellowish rock in front of Anders. It was Bigfoot's tooth. Bigfoot's unparalleled toughness, which could chew through zombies' bodies and bones, was commonly used as evidence in Bigfoot hunting. Anders frowned as he looked at the tooth. Bigfoot. Do you know anything? I heard stories recently that Bigfoot was sighted nearby, in the residential area near the graveyard, to be precise. Aiden could quickly guess where that residential area was. Shettonville? Yeah, that's right. Did you see it too? I saw the traces. It was the place he had passed with Arian yesterday. It seemed like there were zombies gathered everywhere, and perhaps it was the mischief of Bigfoot. While thinking about that, Anders continued speaking. But why did that creature head south? There's nothing there. Bigfoot, which eats both zombies and humans, instinctively moves towards areas abundant with prey. In that sense, if Bigfoot had moved, the direction should be towards the west or east, where there were other residential areas. There was no reason to go south, where the road led to an empty area. But the strange thing wasn't just Bigfoot. It's the same with trappers. They were also abandoning their nests and heading south. Really? Anders thought with his chin in his hand. But the speculations emerging weren't particularly extraordinary. Strange. Is it an earthquake? An earthquake. Yeah, before an earthquake happens, animals sense it and evacuate, right? Aiden shook his head in response to that statement without much consideration, and changed the subject. What about the south? Is there something there? South? Well, I haven't heard anything. Well, at best, I heard stories that a few guys went to the junk shop and never came back. Junk shop? Yes, I assigned them a delivery job to Morgantown. There's a gang there that trades with us. Morgantown is a city about 100 kilometers away from Pittsburgh. Aiden had heard that there was a fairly large gang there. However, they were quite exclusive, so Aiden wasn't particularly interested in them. Was it possible that they were already dealing with them? Aiden admired Anders's cleverness and urged him to continue. But those guys haven't come back yet. It's been a while, so something might have happened. Well, I didn't care much because it happened often due to those snuff guys. Anders tapped the table a few times with his finger. We should send someone to investigate in detail. Do you think so too? As Anders said, Aiden also thought so. He added a detailed explanation to the report because he judged that it was necessary to investigate. Aiden nodded. Okay, leave that to me. Anders naturally accepted the request for investigation. It wasn't just a simple act of goodwill. If there really was something happening in the south, among the two of them here, Anders, who led the gang, had much to lose. Satisfied, Aiden changed the topic. Then let's talk about the reward. I think I know what you're going to say. You caught Bigfoot, so you want a little extra, right? First, I used up the armor-piercing bullets. Those need to be replenished, and we need blood too. Anders nodded at the request. He was one of the few people who knew why Aiden needed blood. Then Aiden pointed quietly at Arian, who was sitting silently. I also hope you can get some clothes for this woman. Clothes? Well, more than that. In response to the clothing request, Arian grumbled discontentedly to Aiden. It meant she wanted blood first. But Aiden shook his head, and Arian turned her face with a frown. Watching the interesting scene, Anders asked Aiden, do you have a preferred style? Why are you asking me that? With a mischievous smile, Anders, who seemed to be teasing Aiden, gave orders to his subordinates. Soon, they guided Arian to an area where clothes were gathered and moved away. 3 members, holding rifles and keeping an eye on Arian, moved away. The possibility was extremely low. At this level, even if Arian suddenly changed her mind and attacked people, she would be subdued quickly. Anyway, she's a woman who has nothing to do with you. Meanwhile, Anders sighed and said, Aiden, with a puzzled look, opened his mouth. You've been saying that since earlier. I know, so I'm relieved. What's there to be relieved about? Well, think about it. If an outstanding traitor and my lifesaver turned out to be a pedophile, how should I have reacted? Clearly, Arian's appearance was at most that of a late teenager. Of course, it was only judged by her appearance, and her actual age couldn't be known. Anyway, if a man like Aiden really introduced Arian as his lover, he would inevitably face such humiliation. What a crappy worry. Aiden frowned inside his helmet. Once upon a time, he had a fiancée, and the memories were quite unpleasant for him. Stop talking bullshit and bring the reward. Aiden urged Anders with a low voice. Anders began to put various types of ammunition in front of him, and a little later, phew, now I feel alive. Arian, who gulped down about half of the blood in a 500 milliliters plastic bottle as if it were mineral water, said so. Aiden had given Arian blood after leaving the outer wall of the cooperative. Walking down the quiet road, Aiden spoke as he looked at Arian. It's unexpected. What is that clothing? The clothes Arian was currently wearing were very ordinary, a hoodie and jeans. Aiden's expectation, based on her initially wearing a long black dress, completely missed the mark, as he thought she might choose something similar. Do you think I'm wearing these clothes because I like them? Was there a reason? There was a protective barrier blocking vampire tracking there, but it's gone now, as time has passed. I didn't know. There was no way for him to know. Aiden, who didn't want to think deeply about it, quickly changed the subject. But, You seem to behave more quietly than I thought. Is it because you can't drink blood? I can't say it's not because of that, but that's not the only reason. Suddenly, a scornful smile crossed Arian's lips. I roughly knew what you were thinking. Aiden brought Arian here to test her. A vampire that drinks human blood. What kind of reaction would she show when seeing a human? In simple terms, Aiden was testing Arian's sociability. Why, did you think I would go crazy and jump around just by seeing a human? Isn't it a common story? Even zombies are like that. But you're a zombie. However, ultimately, Arian passed the test. Although she might be hiding her true nature, knowing how to hide it was crucial. In this world, even though it might be an exaggeration, the difference between zombies and humans was only that much. So, what are we going to do now? Got a new request? No. In response to Arian's question, Aiden shook his head. There were no requests to handle immediately. For Aiden, it was a quite common occurrence to have these gaps in between. But of course, he couldn't afford to waste this time idly. Today, I'm going to look for supplies. Supplies. Either food, water, or medicine. I'm just looking for something useful. You don't have to follow. It's a task with no significant meaning other than being dangerous, Aiden said. In fact, compared to dealing with Bigfoot, this was by no means a dangerous task. But he found Arian's presence bothersome. If only Aiden moved, he could use the motorcycle, and ordinary zombies could be easily ignored like shields. However, if Arian followed, that wouldn't be possible. So, he hoped that Arian would rest comfortably at the hideout. What are you talking about? Of course, I have to go. Disregarding his hope, Arian responded. Aiden clicked his tongue softly. It couldn't be helped. It was part of the contract. So, Aiden headed to downtown Pittsburgh with Arian. A few days later, Aiden was welcoming a quiet morning after a long time. Arian, the vampire who used the adjacent room, was no longer there, because the promised 5 days had already passed. On the morning of the 6th day, just yesterday, Aiden asked her to leave. Arian willingly accepted the request and went somewhere. Traces of the experiments he had conducted until yesterday remained on the desk. Ultimately, Arian, or the vampire's blood, was of no significant help to Aiden. Although the vampire's blood didn't contaminate the bodily fluids of zombies, it wasn't because it had special immunity. Rather, it was because the vampire's blood was fundamentally different from human blood. Arian's blood didn't mix with either human or zombie blood, and they didn't corrupt each other. Although he couldn't analyze the components without proper equipment, it was clear that Arian's blood had completely separate components from human and zombie blood. This also meant, in other words, that Arian, as she claimed, couldn't turn humans into vampires. Still, the lack of results was regrettable. Well, can't be helped. He stood up from the creaking bed. The old bed shook and squeaked. As usual, Aiden packed his bag and left the room, and he refueled his motorcycle with the gas he had found a few days ago. Starting the engine. Vroom. The long-missed engine sound burst out again, as if it was mocking him. The noise, sounding like it was saying, "Why are you here only now?" Aiden, listening to the noise, loaded his bag onto the motorcycle and got on, and he sped off again. The refreshing morning air of spring fluttered his white coat. During the usual ride, various thoughts naturally crossed his mind. One of those thoughts was this: where could Arian have gone? A question Aiden was secretly already halfway sure of the answer. It was none other than the Merchant Cooperative. In Aiden's eyes, that place was the most suitable organization for Arian to join in Pittsburgh. There were various reasons for this, but above all, that place had a lot of blood. The gang members of the Merchant Cooperative numbered around 200, a figure that could easily handle the amount of blood required for Arian's survival and combat needs. Moreover, from the Cooperative's perspective, Arian could be an excellent asset. She possessed physical abilities close to that of mutant zombies, and she wasn't infected by the virus. With such capabilities, she could likely contribute significantly to the Cooperative and quickly rise to a leadership position. So, the Cooperative and Arian were undoubtedly excellent partners in mutual coexistence. Aiden didn't bring Arian there just to test her social skills. He had done so with the consideration of facilitating Arian's easy integration into the Cooperative. A small kindness on Aiden's part. That was Aiden's perspective. Why are you here? He hadn't expected to encounter Arian today. He headed towards a quiet shopping district. It was the hiding place of the small survivor group who had asked Rebecca and Diana for antibiotics for a child. However, in that place now. Why? Can't I be here? Arian, who Aiden had sent away just yesterday morning, was shamelessly guarding the entrance. That's not like you can't, but Aiden's words trailed off like that. He didn't care where Arian settled down. However, for a brief moment, he sharply scanned the surroundings with a piercing gaze. It was just a fleeting, unspoken imagination in his mind. Yet, the chain-link fence still surrounded the house intact, and the metal plate covering the window was sturdy. There were no signs of any battle. Why stop talking? Whether Arian sensed that Aiden was contemplating something severe, she spoke in a sharp tone. Simultaneously, she tapped on the iron door behind her. As it creaked open, the figure of Rebecca, the woman inside, came into view. "Oh, you're here." Rebecca greeted Aiden with a faint smile. "You brought the antibiotics, right?" "Well, yes, but..." Aiden glanced at Arian and asked Rebecca for an explanation. In response, she stepped outside, shrugging her shoulders. "Just as you see, I heard that you are already acquainted with Miss Clifford. She has decided to live with us now." "Why?" Aiden urged for an explanation in an indifferent tone. Even if Arian had come looking for them, he hadn't expected her to be brought into their hideout so quickly. "She saved Diana's life." That was Rebecca's explanation. Just yesterday, while Diana, who was searching for supplies outside, was avoiding a horde of zombies, she became isolated in a building. In that dire situation, Arian coincidentally found her and swiftly cleared the zombies, rescuing Diana. After that, Miss Clifford suggested joining us. "So, you accepted right away?" He understood the circumstances. Yet, Aiden found it strange that Rebecca, who didn't know Arian well, had quickly brought in a vampire with extraordinary abilities. If Arian had demonstrated her power in defeating zombies, they should have witnessed her transcendental strength. Rebecca's group consisted of only 2 adult women and a child. They didn't have a significant number of members to restrain Arian's power, unlike the merchant cooperative. So, in case Arian went berserk, they wouldn't be able to stop her. Accepting her as a companion seemed unreasonably dangerous. "I understand your concern." However, Rebecca, noticing Aiden's thoughts, responded. Aiden's way of thinking seemed reasonable at first glance. However, it was only a thought that Aiden, with his limitations, could have. "Still, we need more people. We can't survive alone like you." Rebecca's group of 3 constantly felt the shortage of manpower. To find what they needed to survive in this ruined city required more than just 1 or 2 people. However, there were only 2 people who could go out to search. Just a few days ago, she had to go on a risky exploration to find what they needed, leaving her child behind. Moreover, yesterday, she almost lost her only companion, Diana. So, Rebecca couldn't afford to let go of Arian, a new recruit with abilities far beyond an ordinary person. Understanding her, Aiden could only let out a sigh. Although Aiden understood her judgment, going beyond this point and discussing it further was beyond his scope. Therefore, he quietly handed the antibiotics to Rebecca. This time, it was 1 bottle of antibiotics. Rebecca happily accepted it and handed him the agreed-upon payment. What returned to Aiden was 2 grenades. It's quite a rare item. At the same time, it was a useful item. Honestly, it seemed more valuable than 1 bottle of antibiotics. Where did she manage to get this? While Aiden was thinking about where she got the grenades, Rebecca opened her mouth. "The medicine is working." "You mean the child?" "Yes. She's no longer vomiting blood, and the cough has improved a lot." Rebecca's face gradually brightened as she spoke, and her words became faster. Observing Rebecca's figure, Aiden quietly watched. Now she's not lying in bed and even asks to go outside. That's good. Oh, it's perfect timing. She's awake. Good. Before Aiden could follow the context, Rebecca went into the house. And soon enough her daughter came out with Rebecca. Bright golden hair swayed gently, and beneath it, in the dazzling emerald eyes, it was difficult to see any trace of the previous appearance, which seemed to be fading away, although there still seemed to be lingering signs of the illness. A vitality comparable to that of a peer-aged child could still be felt. The child hiding behind her mother stared intently at Aiden. Fortunately, the helmet was still on him, and in front of the child's gaze. Aiden cleared his throat and spoke. "Nice to meet you. So, Sadie Lewis." Rebecca introduced her daughter like that. And come to think of it, he didn't even know the child's name until now. Realizing this new fact, Aiden continued with his greeting. "Nice to meet you, Sadie. I'm Aiden Lee. I know, you're the man who brought the medicine, right?" The child's first words were quite bold. Even though she was in a painful condition, She must have known that Aiden was a zombie from the last time. There was no sign of fear anywhere. "Thank you." Afterward, Sadie bowed her head slightly. Aiden, who never expected to receive thanks directly from a child, just nodded. "You're welcome. Well, I'll be going then." Unable to find anything else to say, he tried to leave. However, Rebecca grabbed his arm. "Oh, wait a moment. What is it?" "I have a request." Upon hearing those words, Aiden looked at Sadie. "It doesn't seem necessary to examine her thoroughly. It's not that. Actually, yesterday, Diana brought back some useful information." "Information?" "Yes." "Sadie, could you come inside for a moment?" Rebecca ushered Sadie back into the house after the child left. Once Sadie was inside, Rebecca continued, "We found an underground warehouse." "A warehouse? There seem to be weapons inside. I can't give a precise answer on the types and quantity of weapons, though." Aiden clicked his tongue in response. "Sorry, but I find it hard to believe. It sounds like you couldn't even get inside the warehouse. Did you see the stockpile of bullets yourself? What evidence is there that there are weapons?" "There will be weapons. I guarantee it." The response didn't come from Rebecca but from Arian, who was quietly standing by. "I smelled iron and strong gunpowder there. And the grenades I gave you? I found them near the entrance." Aiden changed his attitude at her words. Arian's heightened senses, something he had experienced during the 5 days of traveling together, were beyond common sense. Even if he hadn't seen it himself, Arian's assurance was different. Moreover, Aiden received the grenades from her, proving that she got them from that place. This was more than enough evidence. "So, what's the request exactly?" "To retrieve those weapons along with Miss Clifford and Diana. The commission fee is to divide the recovered weapons to a certain extent." "How about it? Isn't it just a bunch of weapons lying around?" Diana and even Arian were present, and the situation of bringing Aiden into this had already been noticed. But it seemed that the weapons storage place carried a considerable risk. Arian agreed with that assumption. "Yes, and it seems there's a special one. Is there a mutant too? Where is it?" "I can't tell you that until you accept our proposal." It was a natural condition. Therefore, Aiden asked questions about the number of zombies there and the terrain. "Most of the zombies are underground. The weapon storage is also there." "Underground?" "Yes. So, probably, we can't avoid a fight. Exploring the city's sewers, perhaps." Aiden coughed for a moment at Arian's words. Certainly, this request carried inherent dangers. But, had he ever received a safe request until now? So, he nodded without hesitation. "All right, let's give it a try." Rebecca smiled satisfactorily at his response and immediately spoke. "The location is the power plant." "The power plant?" "Yes, the abandoned power plant on Brunet Island." Brunet Island was a small island in the middle of the Ohio River, penetrating east and west through Pittsburgh. Built on it was a thermal power plant, which had stopped operating a long time ago. Apart from one bridge leading south, there were no access routes to the isolated location. "It seems you explored a dangerous place." Aiden delved into his memories. Until just about a year ago, Brunet Island had been a gang stronghold. Of course, there were no resources worth mentioning on the island, but the only advantage the island had was the narrow iron bridge one had to cross to reach it. Unfortunately, the gang's choice soon turned into an unfavorable outcome. The island's isolation was advantageous in keeping zombies at bay, but it became an extremely disadvantageous factor when dealing with people. The problem arose during the gang's fights. At that time, their opposing gang, instead of attempting to invade the isolated Brunet Island, decided to blow up one of the 2 bridges connecting the island to the mainland. They decided to cut off all bridges to Brunet Island completely, leaving it isolated and gradually withering away, intending to dry up the gang living on the island. This was an efficient tactic, requiring some time. If all the bridges were severed, transportation to and from the island would have to rely on water vehicles like boats. However, without military submarines and only with motorboats, crossing the river guarded by the enemy gang was practically suicide. So, the gang on the island, having realized their enemy's intention, urgently fortified the only remaining bridge to the south. The following fierce battles over the bridge lasted for 2 days, but defending such a narrow bridge was as challenging as crossing it, and, with the next enemy assault, the gang on the island eventually faced the worst self-destruction. That was setting fire to the island. The midnight flames became light and sound, attracting not only zombies, but also dangerous mutants. In other words, They had devised a dreamlike plan of making zombies their allies and attacking their enemies. However, the formidable horde of zombies, mixed with powerful mutants, not only engulfed the hostile gang, but also swept across the gang on the island, even before dawn, crossing the bridge. In the end, with both gangs annihilating each other amicably, the story of Brunet Island came to an end. That was the fate of the island that Aiden knew of. But the information that there were remaining resources, there was a new story. Since it was where the gang stayed, it was natural that some scrap dealers went in with their eyes on that jackpot. Most of them had wandered around, avoiding the zombies concentrated in the power plant and returning empty-handed. But could these people have found what others had not found? Diana found that place. If you get the chance, ask her tomorrow. Is that so? Aiden made a short sigh. She luckily found what the previous gang had hidden. It's dangerous, but there shouldn't be any surprises. Looking at the information so far, it was an assignment with a reasonable chance of success. Convinced that it was okay to proceed with the mission, Aiden urged them on. So, when are you planning to leave? Tomorrow. Let's meet here at this time tomorrow. Got it. But what about the person who actually found the place? He was referring to Diana. Rebecca responded with a bitter expression. She's sleeping. Maybe she was shocked yesterday, or couldn't sleep at night. Maybe tomorrow will be better. Isolated by zombies, there seemed to be a psychological impact. So, Aiden pointed at Rebecca. Then, wouldn't it be better for you to go? But Rebecca shook her head. Well, you guys are at the power plant. I need to get food. There's nothing to eat starting the day after tomorrow. It's probably better on this end than sending Diana alone, right? I see. If that was the case, there was nothing more to say. The conversation with Rebecca and her group ended there. Aiden anticipated tomorrow and parted ways with them. The next day, in front of Rebecca's hideout. Ah, you're here. When Aiden appeared at the agreed-upon time, Arian reacted. She still had a long machete in one hand, different from the one she used before. Since the previous one belonged to Aiden, the one she brought today was probably an item that Rebecca's group possessed. However, in choosing the same machete in the end, it seemed that Arian liked this kind of sword itself. On the other hand, standing next to her, Diana was in a much more thoroughly armed state than Arian. Visible weapons included a rifle and a pistol that seemed capable of full auto fire, and a hatchet was strapped to her waist. Yet, even with all that, she couldn't match the arsenal Aiden was unpacking from his motorcycle. In his arms were a military dagger, a pistol and a revolver always hung on both sides of his waist. A shotgun and a rifle were placed side by side behind his back. A metal bat lay on top of his backpack, and inside the backpack were bombs, including the grenades he received yesterday, and magazines. So, the weight of the weapons and their ammunition alone was quite significant, but Aiden was carrying it without much difficulty. It was possible for him as a zombie who didn't feel physical fatigue. Are you okay? Aiden asked Diana. She nodded calmly in response. Yes, I'm fine. To Aiden, Diana's complexion seemed fine as well. So, he continued, it was Brunet Island, right? You managed to find treasure in such a dangerous place, even using the shortest route. It would take more than 2 hours on foot to get from here to Brunet Island. Simply for a round trip, it would consume almost 5 hours. For those who had to return before dark, the distance could be burdensome. Therefore, to go there, they had to first establish a safe route. How did you get there? I remember the way. So, on the map spread out by Aiden, Diana marked the path she had taken yesterday. It was a route that bypassed residential and downtown areas, as well as gang territories, taking detours through deserted parks and forests. So, it was a route that inevitably went a long way around. But Aiden shook his head, looking at it. At this rate, it would take nearly 4 hours to get there. A round trip of almost 8 hours. The time loss was too significant. It's too circuitous. But there's no choice. It would be too dangerous to go straight. Then, let's do it like this. Aiden quickly modified the route. Each time, Diana pointed out each modification he made. But here's a residential area. Yeah, but it's empty now. The fanatics did some crazy purification right next door recently, causing quite a big fire. Probably, the zombies in this area are all gathered there. What about this area? Isn't this a gang territory? The guys there abandoned the area and moved further north. I confirmed it myself last week, so there's no need to worry. Aiden readily accepted Diana's questions and answered based on ample evidence. Aiden, who always traveled throughout the city on a motorcycle, had a knack for finding safe routes in the city. Let's go this way. The route was quickly modified. The adjusted route would take about 3 hours on foot. It wasn't as direct as the shortest route, but considering avoiding potential dangers, the time spent was significantly reduced. Diana widened her eyes and nodded. It's considerably shorter. Agree. If what you're saying is true, I have no reason to object. Good. Let's move right away. Aiden put away the map and was about to turn around, but Diana's words stopped him. Oh wait, I'll just say hello to Sadie and come right back. She opened the iron door leading into the hideout. As the door opened slightly, Sadie, you shouldn't come out right now. The audacious little girl from yesterday, Sadie, peeked her head out from inside the heavy iron door. It seemed like she had quietly overheard their conversation from inside the sturdy door. Diana tried to push Sadie back inside, but Sadie held onto the door and opened her mouth. Be safe. You. Diana let out a bitter laugh as she looked at Sadie. However, whether she had no intention of breaking the persistence of the young child or not, she nodded and gently brushed Sadie's head. Sadie smiled once and then turned to Arian. Sister too. Yeah, and you do take care of the house, okay? In response to Sadie's greetings, Arian spoke with a warm smile. Aiden, however, couldn't help but feel a sense of confusion at her expression and tone, which differed significantly from her usual sharp and biting voice. Fortunately, his face wasn't visible due to the helmet he wore, so at least his bewildered expression wasn't apparent. Then, Sadie's gaze finally turned towards Aiden. Uncle, come back safely. Double quotes. Sure. Aiden responded awkwardly to Sadie, who greeted him without hesitation. After exchanging greetings with everyone, Sadie nodded once and closed the iron door. Lud. The sound of the lock engaging followed the creaking noise. Though she was a young child, it seemed quite familiar for her to be left alone in this empty hideout. For a moment, he felt sorry for Sadie. Let's move, Aiden said, his voice now cold. The two other women nodded in response. Silently, they walked along the deserted shopping street. We arrived pretty quickly, arriving at the Ohio River after passing through a small, deserted forest and park, Aiden mumbled. The metal bat in his hand was stained with dried blood. Along the way, there were traces left by a few zombies he had encountered. However, Aiden paid no attention to the filthy blood and continued to walk confidently towards the river. At that moment, a riverside road extending along the Ohio River welcomed him. The road was connected directly to the land, and by following this road, one could reach the bridge leading to Brunet Island. However, traveling this road straightforwardly was too dangerous. It passed through areas with frequent zombie appearances, such as residential and shopping districts, making it easy to notice. So, if it were just a den, it might not be a problem. However, with Diana and Arian accompanying him, it wasn't an ideal route. Therefore, Aiden crossed the road and looked down towards the side of the river. Below, there was a railroad track lower in elevation than the road, which had been used by trains. The river flowed from a place where the tracks went down once more. In short, this riverside road consisted of a road, a railroad, and the river, all connected like stairs. Aiden glanced around the railroad. When moving, using the tracks below would be safer. Zombies couldn't swim, so there was no need to worry about the riverside. Moreover, from the land side, people wouldn't be easily visible due to the difference in terrain. I don't see anything. Let's go down. After confirming the safety of the railroad, Aiden said to the group hidden in the shade of the trees. The other two also crossed the road and descended to the railroad. Diana, who safely reached the railroad, let out a short sigh. Her face showed signs of tension. It wasn't unusual. It had taken over an hour to get from the hideout to here, moving without a break. Constantly hiding one's body from the walking corpses not to be detected was exhausting in itself. Moreover, she wasn't with just anyone, it was with Aiden and Arian. From Diana's perspective, there was still not enough trust in these companions, so she must have been unable to let her guard down even for a moment. And come to think of it, how did you plan to go all the way to the power plant, now that there was a bit of a lull? Aiden asked Diana a question he hadn't been able to ask yesterday. It was a question that rose from a trivial curiosity, but the words he brought out weren't because of that. Conversations between parties somehow created a shallow sense of trust. Now that they were supposed to rely on each other, Aiden judged that it was necessary to form at least some familiarity. On the other hand, Diana, while showing a surprised expression that Aiden had initiated the conversation, calmly provided an answer. Since the nearby areas have already been thoroughly searched, we need to go far to find anything. Even so, there's no need to go all the way to an island known to be dangerous. Well, I heard there was a gang there. Also, I heard stories that they hadn't found the resources hidden by them. Are you moving just because of those rumors? Aiden asked in a stern voice. Even if there were fruits, it would be a foolish act to go there just because of rumors. Even if there were results, it was a foolish action. But Diana didn't move towards that place without any thought. I know the power plant structure better than an average person. Originally, I was supposed to work there. Diana brought up her past calmly. 4 years ago, just before the zombie outbreak, she was a university student about to graduate. Thanks to a recommendation from an acquaintance working at the power plant, she had already secured a job, allowing her to accumulate sufficient knowledge about it. Thus, she could see through the structure of the thermal power plant on the island at a glance and quickly. Why discerned something suspicious? Most of the power facilities on Brunette Island are underground. What was visible outside was the transmission tower, chimney, transformers, and a part of the boiler. So, the underground facilities must be quite spacious, don't you think? Aiden's eyebrows twitched at the mention of the underground facility. The idea of such extensive underground spaces on Brunette Island was something he had never heard before. This is just a guess, but those gang members who were there in the past probably used that underground as their base. I also believe this is the reason why they set fire to the island. So, the place where the gang stayed was actually the underground of the power plant. And you found a way to get there? Diana nodded. If you know the structure of the power plant, it's not that difficult. Aiden could only nod in response to Diana's matter-of-fact statement. What seemed like a stroke of luck finding a treasure trove turned out to have clear evidence and reasons behind it. The problem is the underground. I managed to find the entrance while avoiding the zombies' eyes, but inside, it seemed like there were even more zombies than on the surface. Diana's expression darkened as she spoke. I got into a fight with the zombies without properly entering, and the rest is as you know. I see. Aiden nodded. It was as he had heard before. In other words, does this mean that most enemies are underground, in the darkness? Thinking about that, Aiden looked at Arian. The vampire who rescued Diana from the predicament yesterday was walking on the railroad, more leisurely than anyone else, seemingly enjoying the surroundings like a stroll by the riverbank on a spring day. Observing this, Aiden directed a question to Arian. But, why did you go to that island? When he thought about it, the one who moved unexpectedly, beyond Aiden's expectations, was Arian. However, she answered nonchalantly. Well, you told me about it. I told you. Edith, you said there's no one there. He did say something like that. On the third day of traveling together with Arian, Aiden had informed her about the power dynamics in Pittsburgh. To avoid unnecessary trouble in gang territory and battles, he had decided to impart this knowledge. However, she took the teaching the wrong way, only remembering places without people. Did you go there just because there's no one? Edith, at first, I thought about clearing the island and staying alone. Alone? That's a reckless thought. It's not bad living like you, isn't it? But then I met Diana, and my thoughts changed. It just happened that there was a good place for me to join. Aiden clicked his tongue at Arian's words. Rather than a small group like that. Don't say it, I know. You thought I would join some kind of cooperative association, right? Aiden, caught off guard, closed his mouth. In the meantime, Arian continued speaking. But I don't like it. I don't want to fight without my will being involved anymore. Arian's voice as she said that was dry. There seemed to be some circumstances. Aiden speculated on it, but he didn't pry into the details. He had a gut feeling that it was something he couldn't understand, something from a different world. Hey, that bridge over there. During their conversation, they had unknowingly arrived at the bridge leading to the island. The narrow iron bridge, where only trains used to pass, clearly extended across the river, connecting to the island. It's not as many as I thought. Having almost crossed the iron bridge, Aiden commented after surveying the island. The appearance of the island, which had gone through various incidents, was unique. First, the inside was covered with a gray concrete floor. On top of it, iron structures like transformers were arranged regularly. Between them, thick pipes, whether they were sewers or wires, were connected, blocking the path of the group like walls of a maze. Also, on one side of the road crossing the middle, there was only a pile of black ashes, It was the remnants of a fire that occurred here over a year ago. Even now, it remained untouched, exposing the tragedy of that time. Moreover, in the outer part of the power plant, where concrete wasn't laid, wild plants were thriving. In this place where humans had disappeared, only weeds flourished, finally starting to invade the concrete. Because of that, some vines emerged from the ashes, enveloping some transformers and pipes. It looked like a small green jungle was invading a small gray city. Aiden carefully scrutinized the power plant with just his gaze. The zombies he spotted were only 5. Perhaps it was because their vision was obstructed by trees made of steel. Still, yesterday Arian rescued Diana, and it seemed that the zombies on the surface had been somewhat cleared. The entrance leading underground is over there, Diana said. Although Diana had already explained the power plant structure to Aiden, she stepped forward to guide them personally. However, Aiden raised his head. No, let's clean up the surroundings first. Do we really need to do that? Diana's tone questioned the need for taking risks. Aiden responded, first, we need to secure the surface as a safe zone. We don't know what might happen underground, so we need to leave an escape route. Aiden was already anticipating that things might not go as planned. Diana felt a bit uncomfortable with his words, but what he said wasn't wrong. If something like yesterday happens, there will be a big difference whether there are zombies on the ground or not. All right, so what's the plan? For now, I'll move first. Alone. If there are no mutants, I can handle it alone. Aiden planned to use the terrain with obstructed visibility to quietly deal with zombies. Even if the sound leaked out and attracted other zombies, they wouldn't attack him if he stood there. So, a situation where zombies were somewhat scattered in a maze-like pattern was optimal for Aiden. However, even for him, insurance was needed. Vampire, stay about 10 meters away and follow me. Arian heard Aiden's instructions and nodded calmly. Just in case a mutant appeared on the surface, it was a precautionary measure. Diana decided to move with Arian, and the plan was complete. Any other opinions? There were sufficient instructions with nothing to add or subtract. Both women shook their heads. I'll take care of this. Aiden took off his helmet and handed it to Arian. His gruesome face, contaminated with rotten flesh, was revealed. Unlike Diana, who swallowed slightly at the sight, Arian casually took the helmet from him. Then, Aiden took a clean military dagger from his bag. It used to be a ceremonial dagger of the U.S. Marine Corps, featuring a strong and easy-to-pierce blade of up to 200 millimeters. It was suitable for beheading the decayed heads of zombies, a perfect weapon. I'll go then. He descended from the iron bridge, finally setting foot on the island. There was a zombie standing on the path leading from the bridge to the power plant. As Aiden approached, the zombie's head unnaturally turned toward him. It was a zombie wearing a dirty dress, so contaminated that it was impossible to recognize the original color. Though it was hard to tell without a head, it might have been a woman when she was alive. Aiden's figure reflected in the rotten, empty eyes. However, the zombie quickly turned its head with cold indifference, as if it had no interest in the man resembling itself. In the face of such unilateral indifference, Aiden silently approached her, and he covered the mouth of the zombie that ignored him with one hand from behind. At that moment, when the zombie that was held by Aiden was about to go crazy, quack, the blade of the dagger pierced the zombie's neck, breaking the bone, and Aiden pushed it outward with force, separating the head cleanly. Wah! The head of the zombie, without vocal cords, made a sound like a deflated balloon. However, immediately afterward, Aiden's dagger was thrust upward again from the section where the neck was severed, a clever angle that avoided the tough skull and reached the brain. The brain was ruthlessly destroyed as the blade savagely penetrated, and finally, one zombie was completely silenced. Oh, Arian, who had been silently watching the entire process from the railroad bridge, let out a small exclamation. It was a familiar and professional movement, as if he had repeated this many times. It was, quite literally, an assassination. Moreover, the assassination was swift and, above all, quiet. Although there was a zombie hiding behind a pipe, it didn't even show signs of reacting. The rest was like a simple task. Aiden searched between the transformers and pipes that made up the maze, found hidden zombies, dealt with them in the same way, and immediately moved on to find the next one. As a result, about 20 zombies remaining on the surface were completely annihilated in 10 minutes of silence. Arian, who had been quietly following him, shrugged her shoulders and opened her mouth. Not bad. Although Diana didn't say anything, she was secretly surprised by Aiden's skill. Until a little while ago, She had thought of Aiden as just a strange existence, a junkyard surviving by luck after being bitten by a zombie. But now it was clear that it was a blatant underestimation. Aiden not only knew how to utilize the fact that he was a zombie, but he also possessed the skills befitting it. Any more? Aiden, who had dealt with the zombies, approached Arian. Arian closed her eyes for a moment, focusing on her surroundings. The sounds of the still not dead corpses were still present, but they were all echoing from deep underground. Above the ground bathed in sunlight, there was only silence. I think we've dealt with everything on the surface. All right then, let's slowly enter the underground. Oh, there it is. What Diana pointed to were 3 chimneys standing side by side next to the control room, the only building at the power plant. Beneath those chimneys, a huge iron structure was attached like a torso, a scene that would come to mind first when talking about a thermal power plant. Aiden looked up at the chimneys. It doesn't mean we have to go into that chimney, right? The chimney's height was easily over 20 meters, even at a rough estimate. There was no way Aiden could climb up. Perhaps sensing Aiden's concern, Diana added an explanation. It's not the chimney, it's the boiler next to it. Well, it's like a building, you know? There's an entrance on top of it. We need to go in there to get into the boiler. There's an entrance up there? The iron structure that Diana referred to as the boiler looked like someone had flipped the interior of a submarine upside down. Small and thin pipes protruded in various directions, and beneath them, round tanks and rusted iron plates were messily connected. Looking from the outside, there was no visible entrance to get in. It's originally a temporary entrance for maintenance. It's a location that people who don't know about it would find difficult to discover. There, you can use that ladder. Aiden climbed the ladder that Diana pointed to, ascending onto the iron structure. Fortunately, there were no zombies there, but walking on the boiler, cluttered with pipes and obstacles, was challenging. Slowly moved forward, as if in an obstacle race, they soon saw the entrance. There was a round door on the boiler ceiling, reminiscent of the entrance to a submarine. Over here, the ground is quite deep, so be careful. I'll go down first. Aiden took out his shotgun and said so. In the meantime, Diana continued her explanation. There's a passage below. It's narrow, but we should be able to pass through. And if you follow that passage, in the end, it was a story about going through the boiler and descending once more to reach the actual underground space. Aiden turned on the light on his shotgun and entered the boiler. There, a narrow passage blocked on both sides by unknown machinery was revealed, enough for only one person to pass through. The confined space and darkness made it feel suffocating, but Aiden didn't bat an eye, just checking the floor. Unexpectedly, the floor was littered with various odds and ends, like wooden boxes and pieces of cloth. It seems someone was here. This is evidence that this was the entrance the gang used. Oh, the grenades I gave you were found here. Aiden nodded at Arian's words, and they proceeded through the passage. Then, a door leading outside appeared, and beyond it, beneath a rusty platform large enough for only one person to stand, a black hole gaping open. It was the passage Diana had mentioned, leading to the underground space. The ladder going down was next to the platform. The heavily rusted ladder, browned with age, seemed like it wouldn't last long, but it wasn't on the verge of breaking. Aiden first shone the light downwards on the passage. Then, key. Zombies below immediately responded to the light, but Aiden checked the surrounding terrain before they did. The place resembled a small underground factory with unidentifiable machines and structures scattered in a wide open space. Numerous wires and pipes connected along the walls. In between, sporadically visible were zombies, of course, though the exact number couldn't be discerned in the darkness. There were at least 10 in front of him. Fortunately, there seemed to be no mutants. Considering the situation, Aiden soon made a decision and addressed the other two. I'll go down first. Combat will start immediately. So, vampire, come down and support me. Arian nodded lightly, and Aiden's gaze shifted to Diana. Don't come down, stay here and guard. That's better for you. Diana wrinkled her forehead at his words. She thought that Aiden was excessively considerate of her, someone who was practically the party involved in this request. Wouldn't it be better for me to go down too? No, it won't help. But Aiden firmly stated, his decision wasn't about consideration. No one knows how many zombies are down there. We might have to decide to retreat as soon as we enter. In that situation, everyone going down is never a wise thing to do. Aiden kept Diana above, considering the possibility of retreat, especially in a place with only a ladder as the limited escape route. thinking about evacuation. At least one of them had to stay above, and it was undoubtedly Diana who was suitable for that role. I agree with that. Even Arian concurred with Aiden's explanation, and they proceeded. Diana, having nothing more to say, nodded with a short sigh. Got it. I'll do as you say. With that, Aiden nodded and gripped the sides of the ladder with his hands, sliding down as if on a slippery slope. He immediately grabbed his shotgun. Even before Aiden's appearance, the zombies that had been buried in the darkness started to stir. Though they recognized the intruder, their hesitance came from the fact that the intruder was a zombie. The moment they heard the sound of Arian stepping on the ladder, the zombies' gazes turned upward at the same time. Their hesitant eyes suddenly become filled with madness upon seeing fresh prey. But just before their madness manifested outwardly, bang! The thunderous sound erupted from the shotgun. As the shattered remains of the bodies scattered, the battle began. A tense sigh escaped from Diana's lips. How many corpses were hiding in that black darkness? Just counting the fallen zombies, there were easily more than 10. But even that seemed insufficient. As the darkness below continued to spawn more zombies, it appeared as if water was pouring in from all directions. But surprisingly, the two individuals who had descended below were holding off the zombie onslaught effectively. Swoosh! Arian's machete sliced through one zombie, tearing it apart as she passed by. To Diana's eyes, the speed and force were simply inhuman. Of course, it was evident yesterday that she wasn't an ordinary person. Diana had witnessed her tearing apart a zombie with her bare hands. She was called a vampire, right? Although it was an unbelievable thing to accept, there was no choice but to believe it. Otherwise, how could such magical movements be possible? On the other hand, there was another person on the battlefield with Arian. Aiden's movements were extremely refined. Unlike Arian's transcendental abilities, he didn't possess such extraordinary powers. However, his calculated movements and calmness, not flinching even when bitten by zombie teeth, were equally remarkable, perhaps even more so than Arian's abilities. Moreover, he hadn't just vaguely asked Diana for cover. He was aware of Diana's presence, and repeatedly pushed the zombies to places where it was easy for her to shoot. You can say he was consciously using her in the midst of chaos. Therefore, most of the zombie attacks were directed towards Aiden. But Diana couldn't easily shoot because Arian's unpredictable movements made it risky to fire a gun without hitting her. Bang! Diana's rifle silenced another zombie. With each repeated shot, her hands trembled slightly. Blocked vision, perpendicular shooting from top to bottom, and in the narrow space where one might accidentally shoot a comrade. All these factors interfered with Diana's shooting. As a result, an intense tension gradually overtook her body amidst this confusion. At that moment, Aiden's shout echoed. Beast! At those words, Diana's face stiffened even more than before. A beast referred to animals infected with the zombie virus, a term that, strictly speaking, wasn't classified as mutants. However, they were often categorized as mutants because the number of beasts wasn't very high. Ordinary zombies only attacked humans. For some reason, those corpses didn't attack animals. So, the origin of beasts was somewhat limited, like animals driven to infection due to hunger or self-consumption of zombie corpses, a phenomenon restricted to a few cases. However, that wasn't to say it didn't exist at all, and one such beast was hiding in this power plant. Krrrr. With a low growl, a large dog slowly emerged from the darkness. It was the size of a person, with almost no remaining brown fur, tough muscles visible under decaying skin, and a face resembling a bulldog despite its decay. Aiden glared at the beast and quickly guessed its breed. Maybe a Mastiff-type fierce dog. Mastiffs are a strong dog breed that was used as a fighting dog even in the ancient Roman Empire. As zombification progressed, they became more vicious and cruel, making them a much more dangerous enemy than ordinary zombies, even dogs. Aiden quickly turned his gun in that direction. Kwang! But the first to move was the beast. It stared at the shotgun's barrel pointing towards it, then surprisingly, swiftly slipped into the gaps between the zombies. TSK! Aiden clicked his tongue at the sight. Beasts or mutants usually lacked reason, but some beings were intelligent. Unlike the zombie hordes driven by madness and appetite, this beast, despite its twisted nature, somewhat understood the use of the tool called a gun. Moreover, facing such opponents was several times more troublesome than dealing with regular zombies. They wouldn't easily fall into clumsy traps and, in some cases, could even counter with unexpected cunning. Above all, The fact that they didn't move according to the plan was a larger obstacle than any physical difference. As evidence, the beast didn't easily enter Aiden's shooting range. Nothing could be seen. Only the sound of the beast's footsteps reached their ears. Darkness hung over them, and the zombies gathered, and the structures around them formed barricades on all sides. The beast was circling the area cautiously. Was it waiting for an opportunity rather than launching a direct attack? Aiden quickly saw through its intentions, but he couldn't just stay on guard. If he remained still, the zombies would sooner or later bite into him. Therefore, Aiden had no choice but to face the zombies first. Ultimately, the opportunity the beast was waiting for arrived soon. In the midst of holding off other zombies, Aiden's shotgun, which had been scattering buckshot, finally ran out of ammunition. Aiden stepped back slightly, separating the magazine under the shotgun. He threw it on the ground and pulled out a new magazine from his pocket. His movements were fast and precise. Aiden was so well practiced that the quick reload was not just sufficient, but almost overflowing. So, even though several seconds passed, the time consumed wasn't much. Kwang! At that moment, the beast was already charging forward. The beast, flying like an arrow through the darkness, swiftly approached Aiden. This was the moment the beast had been targeting. The reason was unknown, but when the small ornament under its fiery stick fell off, it couldn't attack. This ferocious creature had only a basic understanding of guns. It had used its shallow intelligence to prey on countless humans, devouring their meat. And now, even as its body decayed, the robust creature's jaw was about to claim another victim. However, just before it could reach Aiden, another figure jumped out from behind him. It was a small human, wielding a machete in one hand, who had been with the prey holding the gun. The beast understood the danger of guns. Therefore, the beast considered small creatures holding shiny sticks behind it as unimportant. Until now, the beast had never felt threatened by a human who didn't carry a gun. But that was a clear miscalculation. If the beast's intelligence were slightly higher, it might have sensed the discomfort emanating from the small girl, fighting alongside a zombie holding a gun. However, the beast, remaining at an animal's level, couldn't perceive that discomfort. It didn't realize that the girl with the machete, who was barely holding her own next to a zombie with a gun, posed a threat. Nevertheless, just before the creature could reach Aiden, clang! Gugaguk! The sharp teeth of the beast clashed with the swiftly flying machete in mid-air. The sound of scraping metal resonated as the creature, which had dashed in confidently, was promptly repelled. In the meantime, Aiden, who had changed the magazine, pushed back the zombies with his shotgun and opened his mouth. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. But it got grazed. It's probably not dead yet." Arian frowned as she spoke. Her words were accurate. The beast's teeth were unusually sturdy. As a result, when the machete scraped against its teeth and slid off to the side, it left a large wound from its face to the back leg. But even so, it was undoubtedly a significant injury. Once, it had cut through the thick skin of a Bigfoot, and now it had sliced through the beast's rib cage, spilling its innards. Aiden noticed the traces of the rotten innards and stepped in that direction. "I'll take care of this." "How? What are you going to do?" "I'll finish it." The beast had intelligence. So, Aiden predicted that the creature wouldn't attack further and would likely choose to escape. Such cunning creatures shouldn't be allowed to live. Blood. Aiden swung the butt of his shotgun at a zombie blocking his path. With the retreat of the beast and the decreasing number of zombies, Arian should be able to handle it alone. Judging so, Aiden relied on the light attached to the end of the shotgun and walked forward. The path he needed to take was clear. The pieces of the beast's torn belly were scattered along the way, acting as his guide. Thus, piercing through the darkness, he followed the filthy traces. Zombies blocked his path from time to time, but they didn't try to bite him, who was giving off the same rotten smell. The wide corridor gradually narrowed, and at the end, a door leading to a small office came into view. Was this the den where the beast had been staying in this dark underground space? Aiden solidified his stance and entered. Kurr. The beast was there. However, its injuries were more severe than Aiden had anticipated. The front left leg, which Arian's blade had passed through, was bent backward, and the hind leg was about to fall off. Therefore, the beast wasn't able to stand properly, yet it didn't retreat any further, perhaps realizing it had no place left to escape. Aiden, standing in front of it, simply aimed his gun. At that moment, the beast leaped, and a fierce gunshot followed. The conclusion of the futile pursuit was the end of it. The headless body of the beast fell to the ground, No matter how zombified the creature was, it was an obvious death. Having confirmed this, Aiden attempted to turn away. However, suddenly, something caught his eye. Something that the beast had been sitting on glowed, reflecting the light of the flashlight. Aiden approached and picked it up. Its identity was a leather strap with a severed metal plate. Unlike the leather, the attached metal plate was clean, as if something had been licking it periodically. Engraved clearly on the clean metal plate were the 3 letters, Rex. Rex. That was its name. Aiden placed it on the carcass of the dead dog. Then, without saying a word, he left the small room and closed the wide open door. Only silence and darkness descended on the room now that the intruder had finally disappeared. Are you done? As Aiden returned to the ladder where the battle had taken place, Arian asked. Aiden nodded calmly, surveying the surroundings. It looks like things are settled here too. The number of scattered zombies nearby exceeded 30, an absurdly large number for being trapped in this lightless underground. However, considering the entrance was in the form of a ladder leading up, it wasn't surprising. It had entered like rain pouring in, but it couldn't climb back up. Remaining trapped in this dark underground, there seemed to be a few left, but not too many. We can deal with them as we go. Which way? Arian pointed to the opposite direction of where Aiden had returned. Aiden glanced in that direction, and suddenly, Diana, who had descended under the ladder, spoke. Now we can go find the treasure. At her words, Aiden recalled the purpose of coming here. There was undoubtedly a weapon storage. At that moment, Diana, looking at the bruises on Arian's body, spoke. Arian, are you hurt? Huh? Oh, this is nothing. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal. Diana mumbled with a complex expression. Even a minor injury from a zombie could be fatal. So, she seemed concerned about Arian's wound. But Arian had nothing to worry about in that regard. Just wait a bit. Even so, Diana took out a bandage and wrapped it around the injured area. She had seemed quite friendly, having saved Arian's life yesterday. Aiden looked around. Though buried in darkness, this underground facility was quite large. The traces of gangs lingering here were still vivid. It seemed that there had been almost no one entering and leaving this place during that time. If that was the case, maybe, besides weapons, there could be other gains. Judging so, Aiden looked at Arian and asked, do you sense anything other than weapons? Something else? Yeah, for example, the smell of chemicals or something. At his question, Arian, who had wrapped one arm with a bandage, nodded. Yeah, it feels like there's something similar nearby. Is that so? Ida? The smell of gunpowder is coming from somewhere close. Perfect timing. Thinking so, Aiden resumed his move. Even though zombies appeared sporadically, as Arian had said, their numbers weren't that great. Thus, they safely reached the armory. This is... wow, it's more incredible than I thought. As Aiden's words trailed off, Diana exclaimed in awe. One room was filled with various weapons.